The marks on the wall were a chaotic web of symbols, intricate and disorderly. Unable to encode a specific term, Lucian had simply scrawled the word Emden in plain letters. There was no alternative. His knowledge of the secret code was insufficient. Invoking the moonlight blessing, Lucian retreated from the area, his movements cautious and precise. As he neared his shack, he melted into the shadows, sharpening his senses to detect any lingering supernatural energy within his home. The night watchers had departed. Bathed in moonlight, Lucian could see the spectral eyes that had observed him through the night. Suspended in the air, they were nearly transparent, their gaze locked onto the mess of blankets on the bed. However, they lacked pupils, their watchful presence unsettling yet fortunate, for they could not detect body heat. While an ordinary person would have been paralyzed with fear, Lucian felt a rare stroke of luck. If those eyes could sense warmth, his escape would have already been compromised. He remained in the darkness, waiting patiently. Half an hour passed before the eerie eyes dissolved, their presence fading into nothingness. Soon, a new cycle would begin. Remaining focused, Lucian anticipated the inevitable. Moments later, a ripple of supernatural energy flared in a distant direction, the exact location of the hidden heretic. Grasping a small stone, he hurled it against the opposite wall. The sharp sound of impact rang out in the stillness of the night. The effect was immediate. The forming eyes wavered and dispersed abruptly, as though startled. Seizing the opportunity, Lucian moved. Swift as a shadow, he streaked through the moonlight, his figure blending seamlessly into the silver glow. To the untrained eye, he was invisible. With practiced efficiency, he reached his shack, pried open a window, and slipped inside. Within moments, the window was shut, and he was beneath the blankets, ensuring their contours appeared undisturbed. More than a minute later, the ethereal eyes reappeared, this time with evident caution. For 10 long minutes, Lucian feigned sleep. At strategic intervals, he shifted, turning toward the eyes and kicking the blankets slightly aside, exposing himself just enough to simulate unconscious rest. Had he not awakened his blessing tonight, the night would have been far more perilous. Everything proceeded smoothly. The minor disturbance caused by the stone was insignificant, easily attributed to a wandering cat or a stray bird. Slowly, Lucian succumbed to sleep, aware that greater tasks awaited him at dawn. After breakfast, Lucian made his way to the Musicians' Association. Approaching the office responsible for musicians' accommodations, he maintained the facade of an ordinary request, mindful that the heretics were likely still monitoring him. A middle-aged woman answered his knock. "Mr. Evans? How can I assist you?" "I need to speak with Brian," Lucian said just as Brian appeared. "Is something wrong with the house?" Brian asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Not at all," Lucian reassured him. "However, the bedroom sheets and blankets are far too damp. Could someone dry them properly? Also, I'd appreciate a thorough cleaning of the house by Monday." Relieved, Brian smiled. "Of course, Mr. Evans. Everything will be ready for your move-in by then." Returning to his office, Lucian felt a newfound confidence. At last, he possessed the power to protect Uncle Joel and his family when the time was right. To temper his excitement, he practiced his music. His awakened blessing had sharpened his coordination, and his memory had always been exceptional. Now he could master compositions at an astonishing rate, outpacing most musicians. Within a few rounds of practice, Lucian flawlessly performed Symphony of Fate and several etudes with the precision of a seasoned instrumentalist. Ryan was right, Lucian mused. Blessing, combined with a strong memory, really does make a competent pianist. While knights could learn to play instruments, true musical mastery was another matter entirely. Felicia, who had gifted Lucian the Moonlight Rose, had begun frequently seeking his insight on music. That morning, she visited his office, eager for his opinion on her latest composition. She took their agreement seriously, refusing to waste time. Lucian, however, was no more knowledgeable than she was. To compensate, he tapped into his spirit library, referencing masterpieces from his previous world. By subtly integrating elements from these compositions into his feedback, he left Felicia deeply impressed. "Your talent is astonishing," she said, her crimson eyes gleaming. "And your playing skills have improved tremendously." Lucien merely smiled politely. After lunch, Lucien gathered some belongings from his shack and moved them to the Gisu district. Sunlight bathed the backyard, where his blankets and sheets hung drying. Tension coiled within him. What reaction would the kidnappers have to his note from last night? He slowly unfolded the letter, his breath held. A new sentence had appeared. "Bring the letter with you, Mr. Evans." Feigning confusion, Lucien spoke aloud, as any oblivious person might. "I forgot the letter here last night. I'll be staying in Audiobook this week, since my house isn't ready yet." After a brief pause, the letter responded. "Then bring it with you. It'll make communication easier." Lucien hesitated before replying. "I will, but I want another scene ball." "Granted." The response was immediate. On his way home, Lucien's heightened perception caught something subtle. The marks he had left on the wall the previous night had been altered. "Professor, we are fine. Firewolf volunteered to be your guide for Emden Relic. Where should he meet you?" "Ow!" Lucien maintained his stride, his face betraying nothing. There was no Emden Relic. It was a fabrication of his own design. At midnight, the heretic's vigilance waned. With moonlight shrouding him, Lucien evaded their watchful eyes and returned to the wall. He left a new message. 11 Friday night. East entrance of Larnaca Canyon, Melzer Black Forest. "Professor." By Thursday morning, the second scene ball had appeared outside his shack. Activating it, Lucien saw the familiar wooden cabin and table. Joel's expression was void of emotion, while Elisa silently wiped away tears. Ivan, his face pale, trembled slightly. Beyond them, the silver moon shone through the window, stars dotting the sky. Then Lucien noticed something crucial. Fresh dirt stained their shoes. His heart pounded as realization struck. The cabin was merely a staging ground for recording scene balls. Their true prison was elsewhere. Judging by the freshness of the dirt, it wasn't far from the cabin. Later that day, in the princess's practice room, Lucien's fingers danced across the piano keys. His melody filled the chamber with stirring intensity. And then, mid-note, he turned to Natasha and spoke. "Your Grace, I need to confess." Natasha wore a simple training suit, her long, straight legs still warm from practice. "Confess?" She arched a brow, then her expression hardened. "Confess what, Lucien?" There was a shift in her demeanor. No longer the carefree princess, but a predator poised to strike. Lucien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Lady Camille, his silence speaking volumes. Natasha was sharp. She quickly understood his concern, especially as his fingers continued playing the piano. "I trust Lady Camille with my life, Lucien. There's no need for her to leave. And in Rhotatia, no one can spy on us." "Your Grace, caution is never wasted," Camille interjected. Her blue eyes shimmered before her entire form transformed into a translucent statue of seawater. The water from the statue spilled onto the floor, rising until it reached Lucien's ankles, then his waist, then his chest. Soon, the entire practice room was submerged. Yet, there was no sign of leakage. Instead, Lucien found himself breathing effortlessly, a thin layer of silver light encasing his skin. "A blessing," Natasha observed, intrigued. She quickly offered an apologetic smile. "I didn't expect Lady Camille to test you like this." "There's no need to apologize, Your Grace," Lucien replied calmly. He had anticipated this, which was one reason he had withheld information until now. With his blessing awakened and his magic-concealed spiritual power, he was prepared. Lucien knew he couldn't face the heretics alone. His best move was to bring the matter to Natasha, leveraging noble power. However, he needed the right moment, one where he could ensure the hostage's safety without compromising his own position. This was that moment. Natasha rested her chin on her hand. "Moonlight blessing, but weaker than a knight's." "All right, Lucien. You have my attention. The room is fully sealed by Camille's power. Tell me everything." Lucien took a steady breath. As you can see, my blessing is weaker. That's because it was artificially awakened by a magic potion, one given to me by someone else. He had carefully prepared his words. Since the night I was invited to be your consultant, I have been caught in a conspiracy against you and the Grand Duke. Natasha smirked. So that's their price? A potion to awaken your blessing? That's not entirely accurate, Lucien corrected, blending truth with deception. They kidnapped Uncle Joel and his family. They helped me in the past, when I had nothing, and now they're using that debt against me. They wanted me to spy on your schedule, to report what I hear in the palace. Awakening my blessing was their way of making me more useful to them. Natasha's expression darkened. Camille, all my personnel undergo thorough vetting, correct? Yes, Your Grace. Camille's voice emanated from different points in the water. Mr. Evans's musical talent was undeniable. Though he was linked to a witch's case, no evidence suggested he or his associates were suspicious. As a future Grand Duke, Natasha was guarded with extreme caution. She nodded. Do we have any information on Joel and his family? Camille's tone sharpened. Our intelligence reports suggest they were invited by a noble lord. Lucien sighed. Even with the palace's strict security, I was warned the same evening I acted nervous before you. That means someone within your ranks is leaking information. Natasha crossed her arms. So you did that on purpose. I underestimated you, Lucien. She stood from the bench, pacing through the water. The intelligence department is unreliable right now. Annie Camille informed Cardinals of Melton and Gossett. Cardinal Sard was no longer active. The younger cardinals now managed affairs. Lucien shared further details. How he had purchased the Moonlight Rose from Felicia, though he omitted how he had identified and investigated the Argent Horn members. You're likely under constant surveillance, Natasha noted. Camille, find a spy and extract information. Lucien quickly intervened. Your Grace, we should be patient. Instead of rushing, we should follow the clues to uncover the true mastermind. He couldn't risk Uncle Joel's safety, nor did he want to battle heretics indefinitely. Natasha frowned. It's simple. Catch the spy, beat the truth out of them, and crush the bastards. You're a man, Lucien. Your Grace, Mr. Evans is correct, Camille interjected. If our intelligence department is compromised, the situation is far more delicate. Natasha sighed. Fine. I'll stay silent for now. But I hate complicated things. How dare they infiltrate my palace? Every so often, they send me a magic ball that lets me see Joel and his family. If I find anything useful, how should I contact you? Lucien asked, trying to push the plan forward. Camille held out 3 small sapphires. Each contains my elemental water essence. Drop one into water, and you can communicate with me temporarily. Unless your observer is a level 7 knight or higher, they won't detect it. Lucien pocketed the sapphires as Natasha leaned forward, intrigued. They threatened your loved ones, dangled power and wealth before you. So why confess to me, Lucien? Lucien hesitated for a beat. I had my doubts, but I never trusted the kidnappers to keep their word. Only with your help can I save Uncle Joel. I don't surrender to enemies. That's my creed. Natasha's violet eyes gleamed. Never yielding to enemies? I like that. No wonder you composed Symphony of Fate. I take back what I said. You're a real man, Lucien. Lucien bowed slightly. Thank you, Your Grace. Well, a real man indeed. Natasha smirked. Are you sure you don't need advice on charming women? Our personalities are similar. You could be quite the heartbreaker. Not interested, Your Grace, Lucien replied flatly. And please, don't inform the church about my blessing. My method of awakening, it isn't exactly acceptable. Natasha waved a hand. Understood. Fortunately, Moonlight Blessing isn't considered dark. Once this is over, I'll tell the church that I gave you the potion as a reward. Lucien hadn't expected that. Natasha shrugged. Relax, Lucien. It'll help when you face your enemies. The seawater receded, revealing the familiar practice room. Camille reappeared, and soon, the conversation shifted to music as though nothing had transpired. Later that night, Lucien received a letter. The kidnappers wanted to know what he had seen and heard in the palace. They had no idea he had already confessed. Feigning compliance, Lucien told them John would return on Saturday morning. He used this as leverage to request another scene ball for Friday evening. The heretics agreed. The next day, Friday, after class, Felicia's coach waited for her outside. She had taken the day off to prepare for the ball. As expected, Lucien was ordered to bring the letter with him.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
While Victor, Ryan, and Lot were talking about Felicia's family's manor, Lucien was looking at the scenery outside the coach's side window. Are you okay, Lucien? You're not interested in Bern, the wine exclusively produced by Hain Family Chateau. Noticing Lucien's silence, Ryan smiled to him and asked. The wine named Bern was very famous in Alto. The especial grapes produced in the manor's field were of great quality. Only guests who were invited to the manor could have a chance to taste it. I'm fine, Mr. Ryan. Actually, I'm feeling a bit concerned, since I know nothing about dancing. It's quite embarrassing. Lucien found an excuse to disguise the load on his mind. I can teach you, although you're not a lady, Ryan joked. You can take me as your beautiful lady. Lucien put an awkward smile on his face. There's nothing to worry about, Lucien, Victor comforted him. We all know about your background. No one will purposefully invite you to dance to humiliate you. But if you want to learn how to dance, I'm sure many of the beautiful ladies there will be willing to teach you. Lucien gradually relaxed in this happy atmosphere, knowing that nervousness could not help his plan tonight at all. The coach soon ran out of town and passed Belem River, heading for the manor sitting in the north of Melzer Black Forest. Hain's family's manor was magnificent. Built with fine granite, everything in the manor looked luxury. Wearing a flame-red evening dress, Felicia was already waiting in front of the lobby, followed by 2 rows of servants standing behind her. The yellow flame of the 6 bronze torch holders lit up the evening at 7 o'clock. Good evening, Mr. Victor and Mr. Ryan. Good evening, Lucien and Lot. Felicia welcomed them. Tonight she was the host, and her parents did not come. Every noble lady must be able to host a ball or a party on her own. Adet Novel Benedet. You look gorgeous tonight, Felicia. Victor hugged Felicia a bit and smiled. Dressing in red, Felicia's red eyes and fair skin looked even more beautiful. Felicia thanked her teacher in a noble lady manner, and then she turned to welcome the other many guests. Not only Felicia's classmates were present, but also many of her noble friends. Following Victor and Ryan, Lucien entered the lobby, which could accommodate more than 100 people. The long dining table was sitting in the corner of the lobby. There were wine, assorted salads and pies, sausages, beef, chicken, duck, fine bread, fruits, and many good-looking desserts that Lucien could not even name. The invited band was playing a nice song, making this evening rather tasteful. Lucien picked up a plate on the dining table and loaded it with lots of food. Eating quietly in the corner, he was waiting for Felicia to announce the beginning of the ball. Thank you all for coming tonight. That's my great pleasure and the great pleasure of our Hain family, Felicia said to all the guests in a decent manner. Now, let's dance and enjoy the night. As she was talking, the lobby dimmed a bit and the band changed the song. The gentlemen walked towards the young ladies, and they started to dance in a manner called whirling from the Palace of Tria. While whirling was very popular among young nobles, the conservative elder nobles were denouncing it as very improper and immoral because of the intimacy in whirling. Lucien, are you still eating? This is a ball. After her opening dance with Mr. Victor, Felicia finally found Lucien in the corner beside the dining table. Putting down the plate, Lucien shrugged. I don't know how to whirl, Felicia. Lucien always felt rather hungry after awakening the blessing. In addition to that, a tough task was waiting for him tonight. I can teach you, Lucien, Felicia said to him sincerely. Dancing, along with appreciating music and hunting, is very important in social life. If you want to get along with the nobles, you have to know how to dance. I don't know. I'm not made for this. Lucien was a bit nervous, and he did not want to act weirdly at the ball. He awkwardly reached out his hand to invite Felicia for a dance. You're doing good? Felicia put her hand in Lucien's. Don't worry. First time can never be perfect. Slightly putting one of his hands on Felicia's waist and the other on her shoulder, Lucien started to dance following her instruction, and he was mindfully keeping a distance from Felicia's body. Several minutes later, Felicia looked at Lucien with surprise. You can dance very well, except you're a bit stiff. Is this your first time practicing whirling? No, not really. Lucien couldn't tell her about his blessing and quickly found an excuse. The princess taught me a bit before. No wonder. After all, the princess is a grand knight, and she must be a good dance teacher too. Felicia nodded, and then she suddenly giggled. Her grace is half head taller than you, and she is a great knight. When you were dancing with her, you probably look more like a lady. Felicia definitely heard some gossip about the princess. After all, Natasha never hid herself in front of people. Lucien was a bit speechless. Then an idea flashed into his mind. Suddenly, Lucien lost his balance and slipped on the floor. He gasped in pain. Are you all right? Asked Felicia with concern. You need a doctor? My ankle hurts. Can you just have someone to lead me to a guest room? I just need a rest. Lucien shook his head. Felicia nodded and asked a servant to walk Lucien to the guest room on the 3rd floor. The guest room was clean and nice, and the blanket on the bed was light and soft. Sitting on the bed on his own, Lucien took out the letter and wrote several words down on it. I need the ball. It was close to 8 at night, and it was dark outside. More than 10 minutes later, the heretics replied, Open the window. As Lucien opened the window, the lively music playing downstairs immediately drifted up to him. Together with the music, a small black ball was thrown into the room. Lucien agilely caught the ball. This time, instead of crumbling the ball, Lucien took a peek at the inside of the ball. Through the heavy smoke in it, he saw the same cabin. Luckily, the kidnappers did not move. Putting the ball back into his pocket, Lucien responded through the letter. I'll calm John down tomorrow morning when I meet him. Your cooperation is appreciated, answered the letter coldly. Lucien folded the letter, put it back into the pocket of his black suit, and hung his suit on the rack. In the following hour, a few people came to visit Lucien, including Victor, Rhine, and even some young nobles that Lucien did not know. Yvette looked a bit disappointed when she visited Lucien, since obviously the injured young man could not do anything that night. After 9:30, the guest room finally quieted down. Lucien locked the door from inside, blew out the candles, and lied in the darkness. A while later, he finally stood up and poured himself a cup of water. At the same time, he secretly dropped one sapphire given by Camille into the water. You found anything, Lucien? Camille's voice directly sounded in his mind. Lucien answered to Camille silently in his mind, southeast of Melzer Black Forest, close to Lubeck Mountain. Then, pretending that it was an accident, he dropped the cup on the ground. The direction was very inaccurate, and it was far away from where the cabin was located. Even if Camille was going to search the whole area, she would not be able to find the cabin. Lucien swore a bit and went back to the bed. He stuffed the other 2 sapphires under the pillow and covered himself with a big and soft blanket. The ball was still going on, and the noise of the party made the night feel even quieter. Some random dogs were barking afar. The silver moon was up, and the moonlight sneaked into the room. In the moonlight, the blanket covering Lucien slightly twisted a bit. Lucien escaped again from the window that was left open by him purposefully. With his sharp vision, Lucien saw a black figure hiding behind a big tree not far away from the manor. Taking the opposite direction, Lucien climbed over the wall of the manor and ran into the forest behind it. In the forest, he put on the black sorcerer robe that he prepared in advance and then ran toward Larnaca Canyon. With moonlight, Lucien moved quickly through the woods like a shadow. Although the manor was quite far from Larnaca Canyon, 20 minutes later, he could already see the shining Massal River, which was very close to the canyon, reflecting the moonlight in front of him. Lucien slowed down a bit to be more cautious. He saw several campfires blazing in the distance, which were probably lit by adventurers. The riverbed was covered with countless pebbles. The river named Massal kept running eastwards and in the end joined Belem River. Wearing a black hood, Firewolf stepped out of the tree's shadow very cautiously. There was an unfeathered, bright red-skinned bird standing on his shoulder. Tonight, the Night Watchers were making an ambush in a distance, and the leader of the Night Watchers, Clown, was waiting for his signal. Firewolf betrayed the apprentices' group for a reason, A magic potion called Magic Gate would be given to him from the church after successfully arresting Professor. The potion could help him become a real sorcerer, and then he would be allowed to join the Night Watch. At that time, there would be no need for him to hide as a spy and a betrayer anymore. Grabbing the bracelet in his pocket nervously, Firewolf was trying his best to stay focused in order to sense if anyone was approaching. The bracelet called Fireweaver was a level 3 magic item given by the church to help protect himself when facing Professor. Although Clown promised to him that they would arrive within 30 seconds after they saw his signal, Firewolf's heart was still beating very fast. No one knew what was going to happen within the 30 seconds. It was already 10:40. Firewolf heard wolves howling deep in the woods. He arrived at the entrance to the canyon, but did not see Professor. Turning around, he saw something shining on a big rock. It was a message left by Professor. Meet you in the Black Forest, close to the south entrance to the canyon. Firewolf was not really surprised that Professor changed the meeting place all of a sudden. After all, it was a quite common way to avoid being tailed after. After the weird-looking bird, Firefeather, made several chirps as a signal for the Night Watchers, Firewolf headed into the deeper woods. This time it took him more than 10 minutes to arrive at the designated place. It was very dark around since the moonlight was completely shaded by the tall and thick cedars. Firewolf heard several savage howls in a distance, sounding rather thrilling. However, it was a relief for him since the howls were made by the Night Watchers. They had followed Firewolf here, and then the team scattered to check the surroundings. Half an hour later, Professor still did not show up. Firewolf started to feel irritated, pacing back and forth, and wondering if Professor had somehow found out that it was S trap. The Night Watchers also lost their patience. Clown sent the message to the other Night Watchers using a secret method. Search this area in a 500-meter radius around the south entrance. The Night Watchers around started to move instantly. Soon Minsk, one of the Night Watchers, found a wood cabin in the forest. In the forest on the other side of the cabin, one of the Night Watchers had become a dead body with the fear still lingering on his face, and part of his brains were visible. A slender man wearing a long black jacket was standing beside the dead body. The silver horn pattern on his jacket was rather noticeable. His right hand was covered with the Night Watcher's white brain tissue, and the man was sucking his fingers to enjoy the taste, as if he was tasting the sweetest candy. A crystal ball on the man's left hand suddenly emitted a rather old voice. Kill them all, Dragon. The Temple Knights will help you. Do not let them find our relic. Yes, my lord. The man finished licking his fingers, although I'm quite sure these poor guys' target is not us. I enjoy killing. And brains. His black jacket billowed out in the wind, and within a second, he disappeared in the darkness. Tonight, the two Night Watcher teams were composed of a total of 30 members. Among them there were pastors, knights, and even 4 Grand Knights as the team leaders. Close to half of the Night Watchers of the Inquisition were sent in order to capture the mysterious Professor alive. However, the Dark Forest unexpectedly turned into a hell to them tonight. They forfeited their lives here without even knowing who was their real enemy. The smell of blood spread through the forest. Clown was trying to contact the other Night Watchers. Suddenly, he sensed the threat from behind and immediately rolled forward. A black ball fiercely struck the place where Clown was just standing. After that moment, the stones, grass, and trees in the area disappeared completely, like water completely vaporized within a second. Clown remained calm. His fingers started to move in a weird way, like he was playing piano. Translucent lines grew out from his fingers and quickly shot out into the woods, pulling someone out. It was Gragan. Puppet Blessing. Interesting. Dragon's body gradually melted within the darkness and escaped from the fine lines. Is it how you utilize your dark blessing? I see. You became the Hound of the Inquisition. Dragon's voice was rather cold. Puppet is no dark blessing. It's a special gift from the God of Truth. Not like your filthy dark power, Dragon. Clown recognized him and called his name. Clown lifted his arms again, and this time the fine lines became much stronger. When the lines captured Dragon again, at the same time, Clown shot off the magic firework as a signal asking for help from the church. However, before the firework was fully spread in the sky, a sudden strong black wave directly struck it. The firework signal was instantly devoured by the wave and disappeared in the sky. Dark Devourer, a level 6 fiend spell, which was how the church called the power that did not come from the God of Truth. The person who just cast this spell was of cardinal level. In the underground relic, 5 high priests wearing silver robes were looking up at the 2 great priests standing on the altar respectfully. It's time to show your loyalty to our true God. Lead the other priests to devastate our enemies outside, the hounds of the so-called God of Truth. The bald old man on the altar commanded. Be quick, the other great priest added, coldly. Although I stopped the signal, we shall still finish them as soon as possible before the heretics outside can ask for help again. Your will is God's will, great priests, answered the 5 high priests at the same time. The Night Watchers were very experienced fighters, and they did not earn their name undeservedly. When they realized that their enemies tonight were actually the heretics, they started to fight back. A Night Watcher was holding a thick canon of scripture in his hand. This man was called Cannon Holder, and he was the leader of the other Night Watcher team tonight. Cannon Holder's steps were firm and steady. As he flipped the pages of the cannon, a huge flame ball came right down from the sky and instantly vaporized a dark knight in front of him. Level 4 divine spell, Flame Strike. Without any interval, this Night Watcher flipped the pages again and summoned a flame wall and protected his team members, who were facing another dark night. Cannon Holder was a level 5 bishop who voluntarily gave up his life under the sunlight and joined the Night Watch to fight for his true God. Lucian was sitting on a big tree quite a distance away, looking at the explosions on the ground expressionlessly, as if he was appreciating nice fireworks. He saw that the rest of the Night Watchers were approaching the wood cabin. He saw that the Night Watcher, Mintz, survived for now with his defense called Dragon Scale from his red dragon blessing, and he saw that there were only 18 Night Watchers left out of 30. However, Lucian was still waiting. Around 1 kilometer away from the wood cabin, there was a huge cedar. Lucian was sitting on the cedar waiting for the end of the fight between the church and Argent Horn. When he saw the black wave which devoured the Night Watcher's signal, Lucian calculated the angle and the distance, and thus located where Argent Horn was actually hiding. About 90 meters northwest of the wood cabin, Lucian murmured in a low voice. At the same time, Lucian looked at another direction and wondered in his mind. She should have noticed the chaos already. As the heretics and the Night Watchers started to gather together, Lucian felt it was finally time for him to take action. Flame Strike, Angel Summoning Healing. Cannon Holder kept casting spells without interval. As a level 5 bishop, he was able to both devastate his enemies and save his comrades. His spells destroyed many magic circles and traps placed by Argent Horn, and thus the 2 great priests in the underground palace lost their control on the ground. As 6 out of the 18 Night Watchers were pastors, they were able to heal their injured comrades over and over again. Under the command of the 2 team leaders, the gathered Night Watchers kept moving forward, and the situation started to turn around and became more favorable to the church. However, at this time, a dark cloud arrived, and the cloud was somehow squeaking. Bugs! Cried Mintz to alert the other Night Watchers. These bugs were just too many to be immediately eliminated. They moved very fast and soon encircled the Night Watchers. Countless bugs fully covered the shields of light that were protecting the Night Watchers. As the several pastors were trying to strengthen their light shields, they suddenly felt too weak to cast any spell. Their faces were burning like they were having a fever. As soon as the shields expired, the bugs launched their attack onto the Night Watchers. Using his red dragon blessing, Minsk blocked some of the bugs away from them with Dragon Scale, but he knew that he was also reaching his limit. It was a level 5 fiend spell, plague co-cast by the 5 high priests. More Dark Knights and heretic priests arrived. The situation the Night Watchers were facing became tough again. Cannon Holder stopped attacking and turned to focus on driving away the bugs and curing the Night Watchers, especially the pastors. Several Night Watchers wearing silver armor stood in front of the pastors to protect them. As the bugs were dying, the pastors were gradually recovering. Then they started to cast many divine spells such as Blessing, morale, and prey on the 4 fully armored Night Watchers to improve their strength, agility, and persistence. Clown and Minsk were protecting them from the fierce attack of the Dark Knights and the priests. The 4 warriors, blessed by the divine power, shouted and hacked their huge swords toward their enemies at the same time. The black gloves they were wearing covered their swords with a layer of black light, making the swords sharper and more powerful. Although the several Dark Knights up front had different powers such as Black Dragon, Rock Titan, and Grey Elf, they were not able to resist the furious 4 warriors with such combined divine power. For some reason, when facing the huge swords, Shield of Darkness became useless, and so did Flame Wall. 4 dark priests and a high priest suddenly became totally unprotected and got hacked into half. This blessing is elimination. The elder great priest in the underground palace was quite surprised, for knights with elimination blessing, and one of them is a level 5 Grand Knight. The blessing called elimination could make any supernatural power that did not belong to the real God become invalid. And, of course, the effectiveness of this blessing depended on the individual power, and the real God it referred to could be chosen. Elimination was the most precious and purest blessing among the traditional demon hunters. Angola, you gotta help them, the other great priest said to the bald priest. We should not waste our power here for such an accident. This accident is a test from God. Angola smiled, looking rather old, interesting. Their original target was a sorcerer, and now we're fighting. I'll stay here to protect the temple, said the great priest in silver robe. At Novelbanat. When the Night Watchers finally found a chance to send the signals, blurs of shadows rushed at them from different directions with great momentum. A knight among the Night Watchers got struck by the black shadow right in his face, and he gave out shrill cries. Level 7 Fiend spell, Hungry Shadow. Soon the knight's eyes became red. He slowly lifted his huge sword up and hacked toward the other Night Watchers. His soul was eaten by the shadow, and his body would be controlled by the spellcaster for a short time. The moment Lucien sensed the evil aura from the great priest, he suddenly sat up and became translucent to some extent in the moonlight. He quickly landed on the ground and started to run toward the underground temple as fast as he could from the other side of the forest, in order to avoid the battlefield. Standing in front of the entrance to the underground temple of Argenthorn, although he was almost invisible in the moonlight, Lucien was still very nervous that he might be found by the heretics. However, he knew that Uncle Joel and his family were in great danger, so he had no choice but to take the risk. Then, a piece of moonlight secretly sneaked into the cave. Inside the cave, there was a long and slanted paved path heading toward the underground palace. Around every 10 meters, there was a candlestick on the stone wall. The yellow candlelight was rather dim and made the pathway even more thrilling. Quick as a shadow, Lucien quietly followed the pathway and went into the deeper darkness. The silver-robed great priest was checking the other pathways through which the hounds of the church might sneak into the relic. However, he left the main entrance for last since Angola was fighting in the front, and that gave Lucien precious time to find the dungeon. Instead of spreading his spiritual power, Lucien was using his acute hearing to sense his surroundings. It seemed most of the guards were currently out to fight against the Night Watchers, since Lucien heard no one talking or walking. In the nest of the heresy, he needed to be very cautious with the use of any supernatural power. The underground relic was huge. Although he did have a few rough guesses from observing the surroundings and the scene balls, Lucien never expected that there was indeed such a magnificent relic here. As the ground became smoother, Lucien saw that there were many iron doors on both sides of the pathway. Feeling rather hesitant, he was not sure if he should open the closest door in front of him. His right hand grabbed the handle, slightly shaking. Lucien had no idea what was waiting for him in the room. Just when he was about to turn the handle, Lucien heard someone talking. The voice came from another room, but not far from where Lucien was standing now. "What's going on outside?" "All the priests are out," a man asked. His voice sounded nervous. "I have no idea what is happening." "The explosion sounded horrible," answered the second person. After roughly estimating the strength of the two heretics, Lucien decisively opened the door and fiercely rushed at them. The heretics were totally unprepared for this sudden attack, and in the next second they were knocked out and fell on the ground. Closing the door behind him, Lucian awoke one of the young heretics. After feeling rather confused for a second, the heretic recalled what just happened and was about to scream for help. However, the only thing he managed to do was opening his mouth. As soon as he made eye contact with Lucian, his mind got lost. There were countless stars in Lucian's eyes, and his eyes were as deep as two black holes. "Do you know where they are? The poor family that they just caught several days ago?" asked Lucian in a soft and low voice. "Yes. Yes, my lord." The young heretic looked rather respectful, since he had been hypnotized by Lucian's eyes of stars. And as eyes of stars was more of a kind of hypnotism, very little magic wave could be detected. From that hypnotized heretic, Lucian collected some important information. The palace was located in the west side of the huge relic, where the main force of Argent Horn usually patrolled, while the dungeon was in the northwest, guarded by an average dark knight and several of his squires. Besides, the relic actually had more than one level. However, the several levels beneath were completely destroyed and could not be utilized anymore. On this level, there was a total of 5 pathways connected to the Black Forest. Knowing that the main force could come back at any moment, Lucian needed to hurry. Breaking the 2 heretics' necks, he left the room, bypassed the palace in the west, and headed toward the dungeon fast and quietly. With a better knowledge of this relic, Lucian calmed down a bit. Soon he arrived at the dungeon. The dungeon was quite big, and it was divided into half by the iron bars. There were around 7 or 8 cells on one side, while on the other side 4 knight squires were pacing back and forth, talking about what was going on outside. Behind them, assorted instruments of torture were hanging on the wall. The old man wearing black leather armor had a twisted face. At this moment, he was sitting on a bench, listening to the sound of fighting outside and looking at the cells on the other side with an irritated expression. Lucian thought that he must be the Dark Knight. Then the old knight stood up and said with anger, "Bring them here, the 2 who lost their fingers. I need to have something to do." Lucian's heart suddenly sank. "Lord Jansen, they can't be killed right now." A knight squire dissuaded him. "I don't need you to remind me," shouted Jansen irritably. "They're the most king troublesome prisoners in the whole bloody dungeon. I gotta take them to that shitty cabin every couple of days. So what am I in the pre-size? King Dogwalker." Jansen's irritability and anger came from his blessing. The squires exchanged a look, and one of them took the keys and opened a cell. "You 2, get out of here." Tim kicked Joel and Elisa, who were lying on the ground. Joel and Elisa were very scared. Ivan's eyes were filled with tears, and he bit his lips silently, since there was nothing he could do as a young boy. "Move!" Tim kicked Joel on his back. Out of the iron bars, Joel staggered forward and fell over in front of Jansen. Taking the leather whip down from the wall, Jason fiercely flipped the whip on Joel and Elisa with great anger. "Rubbish. Damned idiots. And I need to king walk you every king day." Every time he burst out a word, Jansen lashed at them with a bitter whip. Although Jansen was still constraining himself to avoid killing Joel and Elisa, his whip still made Joel and Elisa scream at the top of their lungs in great pain and roll on the ground back and forth. While Jansen was enjoying the screams, Lucian was clenching his fists with great anger. The muscles of his body were all tensed up. He wanted to kill all the bastards and tear them up to pieces right now. However, he still had to bide his time. Acting in a rush and impulsively could easily kill him here, not to mention rescuing Uncle Joel and his family. Hiding in the darkness, Lucian was waiting. "Ilya, these night watchers are tough." Angola was floating high in the air, sending his voice to the other great priest using his fiend power. "They have lots of powerful magic items. Luckily, we took the initiative and all of their magic items are destroyed. Only 5 night watchers were still standing. They were Clown, Salvador the Cannon Holder, a Grand Knight, Minsk the Red Dragon, and a pastor. The other 25 night watchers were all dead, and some of the bodies were even destroyed. Don't waste our time anymore, Angola. Finish them all, and we have to destroy this entrance." Ilia's voice came and urged him. All right. Angola raised his arms again, covered by dark shadows. At this time, the night sky suddenly turned blue in a weird way, as if the ocean and the sky exchanged their positions. The ocean was hanging up above them, and a huge water column shot downward and overwhelmed Angola. Ilia sensed the power, and he stood up instantly. Camille, the blue tide. Adet novel Benedet. The level 7 radiant night arrived. Flying high in the sky, the two great cardinals, Gosset and Amelton, also arrived following Lady Camille. Kill all the prisoners. Destroy all the evidence. Everyone leave through the other pathways. Ilia commanded immediately. At the same time, he started to cast the spells to destroy the altar. Although he was a level 7 priest himself as well, the reinforcements of the church consisting of the two great cardinals and a radiant knight were irresistible. Besides, Sard, the horrible monster, also could show up there at any moment. Receiving the order, Jansen lifted his whip high with a savage look on his face. When Lucien heard the deafening splash coming from outside, he knew it was time for him to take action. Like a white shadow, Lucien jumped out of the darkness and rushed at the dark knight with great momentum. Jansen's blessing gave him not only the irritated personality, but also a sharp instinct. The moment he sensed the danger, Jansen turned his wrist and fiercely flipped the leather whip backwards. Lucien was prepared, and he was also faster than Jansen. Tapping the ground with one foot, Lucien quickly changed the direction of his movement, and at the same time, he easily cut off the leather whip with the dagger in his hand. Without any hesitation, Jansen threw the whip away and grabbed his triple-headed flail from the table. The big chunks of muscle under his leather armor almost burst out, and his eyes became red, like those of a furious bull. Facing Jansen's huge weapon, Lucien suddenly stopped and dropped a handful of fine powder on the ground. A deafening thunder burst out. The loud thunder almost knocked Jansen unconscious for a second, not to mention his four squires. When they were about to pick up their weapons, they were attacked by the strong sound waves and then fell on the ground. Uncle Joel and Elisa also passed out. Homan's Oscillation, a spell of apprentice level which utilized high decibel sound waves as the weapon. Being used properly, a low-level spell could also be quite effective. Facing the great thunder, Lucien himself also felt a bit sick. By the time when he was able to take a firm stand again, Jansen had also recovered and started to wield his huge flail. That was a triple-headed flail, looking rather heavy, and the three heads were also different. One was covered with lightning, one with fire, and the last one with a green and sticky slime. The big chunks of muscle in Jansen's arms were like rocks, and the whole dungeon was slightly trembling from his angry howling. He wielded his flail in a crazy manner, and it seemed like the word defense never existed in his dictionary. Lucien was a bit surprised. After all, most knights, no matter if they were from the church or the Dark Knights, were well trained with different fighting skills. However, Jansen was not one of them. Probably it was because his physical strength was so overwhelming that there was no need for him to carry out the strategies in his mind. The idea of a direct head-on resistance was obviously too stupid, and Lucien was way smarter than that. Employing delaying tactics together with his Moonlight Blessing, Lucien kept moving around swiftly in the dungeon to avoid the three huge iron balls of the flail, waiting for the Dark Knight to get tired. However, Lucien soon noticed that something was not right. It seemed that the one who would be exhausted first was himself. The buzzing lightning on one of the iron balls was somehow slowly paralyzing his body, even if the flail never actually hit Lucien. Lucien could not waste time anymore. He took a few large steps back to gain some distance from Jansen, who was fighting like a furious beast, and within few seconds Jansen was once again in front of Lucien, wielding his terrifying black flail with great momentum. Throwing another handful of shining power to the ground, Lucien activated the spell without casting. Although that would cost him more spiritual power, it was definitely worth it. Adet novel Benedet. A dazzling light ball suddenly appeared in the dungeon, and it instantly lit up the whole place like the midday sun. Jansen subconsciously closed his eyes to protect them from the bright light, and his movement paused for a second. That second was more than enough for Lucien. Curling his body a bit, Lucien shot himself out toward Jansen, as fast as an arrow. The dagger was shining, with a cool radiance in his hand. Jansen quickly turned his wrist inwards to attack Lucien with his flail, but it was too late. Although the 3 iron balls were still chasing Lucien's back, he was already very close to Jansen. However, Lucien's silver dagger almost cracked when he stabbed Jansen in the chest. Because of his furious savage blessing, Jansen's chest muscles were like big pieces of rock, which were also covered by his fine leather armor. Jansen's relentless attack was supported by his great defensive capability. The flail was just a few centimeters away from Lucien's back. Jansen looked at Lucien with a cruel smile on his face, but surprisingly, this skinny little bastard smiled back at him. The Dark Knight immediately realized the great danger. Fiercely leaning back his body, Jansen tried to avoid the second round attack. Palmera's frost blades. 3 sharp ice blades targeted Jansen's throat, heart, and waist. Since they were too close to each other, by the time Jansen started to tilt backward, the blades had already arrived. While the one targeting his heart was stopped by the tough muscle in his left chest, the other 2 blades cut his throat and his abdomen wide open. His blood spurted out, but froze instantly. At the same time, Lucien quickly covered his body with a layer of moonlight to take the attack of the flail. While the flame and acid were blocked by Lucien's moonlight armor, the lightning went directly through and struck him. Jansen and Lucien fell onto the ground at the same time. Lucien was paralyzed by the lightning, and he felt both pain and itch in his body. Bang! The flail fell to the ground from Jansen's hand as well. Rough and muffled groans came from Jansen's throat. Lucien could see that the fresh blood was still running out of the big man's body. A few seconds later, the groans stopped. Jason's eyes were still wide open, filled with anger and astonishment. Lucien stood up with great effort and finally stabilized his legs. Slowly, he approached Jansen's body and broke the savage's neck, just in case. Luckily, his tactics worked. By hiding his blessing and the magic item Ice Revenger, Lucien pretended he was nothing other than an ordinary sorcerer apprentice. If Jansen had not underestimated his enemy, Lucien would be in big trouble. Then, without any hesitation, Lucien came to the squires who were trying to stand up from the ground with dizziness and decisively wrenched their necks. He purposefully saved Tim for last. I beg your mercy. Please, cried Tim, crawling on the ground. Mercy? Lucien sneered. When the innocent people were begging, where was your mercy? A pair of cold hands reached Tim's throat, and the fingers slowly tightened. Finally, there was a crack in Tim's neck. Now Lucien held no more fear and hesitation toward killing, since in this world, people like him had to either kill or be killed. Picking up the heavy flail, Lucien started to attack the 5 bodies to destroy the evidence. The flail was so heavy that even Lucien, who was already stronger than common people, was having a hard time lifting it over and over again. Powerful as it was, the flail soon tore the bodies into pieces, and the flame and acid quickly destroyed the body parts completely. Lucien was now feeling a bit concerned because during the fight, he had absolutely no idea how dangerous this weapon was. If he really got hit by this flail without his moonlight armor, he would be seriously injured. Within only 30 seconds, the bodies turned into a small puddle of unknown green liquid and some ashes floating in the air. Lucien kicked over the water bucket in the corner and quickly cleaned up the mess on the floor. As for the floating ashes, he summoned a gust of wind by heating up some of the air inside that room and cooling down the air outside of it, to blow the ashes away to the aisle. Then, with great caution, Lucien carried Joel and Elisa back to the cell with Ivan, who were still unconscious from the oscillation spell. Although Lucien was very excited to see Joel, Elisa, and Ivan again, he could not leave with them right now, or he would definitely be suspected by the church. After all, in people's eyes, he was no more than a physically weak musician. After all the work, he pulled out a tube of brown owl and drank it, as his natural recovery was slower underground due to the lack of moonlight. A moment later, Lucien was rushing through the most remote pathway to leave the underground palace. carrying the flail with him. The pathway was very far from the palace and the other core places in the complex. Therefore, it should be relatively safe. However, the weird thing was that Lucien did not see any heretics on his way. Down on their knees, these ordinary heretics in the stone room sounded rather panicked. "Lord Jerome, what shall we do right now?" Before they could finish their words, their faces suddenly twisted with great pain. Pieces of black cloud came out of their bodies and instantly took their souls away. As the masses of black cloud were absorbed into Jerome's body, he shrugged a bit. "Well, what you guys should do is to die. It would be impossible for those ordinary heretics to escape from the church, so they must die, or more information about Argent Horn would be revealed." Lucien was getting close to his destination. He could see dim rays of moonlight cast from the outside of the cave. Suddenly, he stopped running and hid himself in a dark corner because he sensed the strong smell of blood. There were several dead bodies scattered on the ground on the way out of the complex. According to their special robes, Lucien could tell they were the heretics from Argent Horn. Realizing that the heretics were killing their ordinary followers, Lucien decided to wait there a bit more, just in case. Someone was screaming with great fear in the darkness. As the squeal was getting closer and closer, Lucien clenched his fists. Suddenly, the squeal stopped. The person was killed. "This should be the last one," sounded a cold voice. "Ilya asked us to leave as soon as possible after cleaning up." "I don't see Jansen," the other young but hoarse voice answered. "We're not going to wait for the savage." "We can't," urged the cold voice. "All right, we leave now," agreed the second person. Then Lucien heard their steps leaving the cave. Taking a deep breath, Lucien made his body partially translucent into the moonlight and rushed to the exit. Under the cover of the silver moon, he successfully jumped into a bush. Breathing the air mixed with the smell of dirt, Lucien released a long sigh of relief. At it was very quiet around him. For a moment, he felt that what happened in the underground palace was almost like a dream. However, the many scattered dead bodies of the heretics around the bush were reminding him how cruel the night was. Looking up at the moon and the few stars in the sky, Lucien roughly figured out his current location and started to run toward Massall River to get back to family Haynes Manor. The heavy flail was quite cumbersome, but luckily the silver moon was out tonight, and Lucien's speed and strength were both improved in the moonlight. Several minutes later, he approached the wood cabin with great caution. Almost everything was destroyed in this area, from the many powerful divine and fiend spells. Dead bodies were everywhere, and many of them were burned beyond recognition. Among the bodies, Lucien saw one wearing a sorcerer robe, which drew his attention the most. So Lucien flipped the body over, and he saw the young man's face. The great fear the man experienced before he died was still there. Firewolf. Lucien murmured the name. An idea came to Lucien's mind. Using Mage Hand, Lucien left a line of words on Firewolf's body with his half-clotted blood. The end of the betrayer. Professor. After leaving the line of words, Lucien checked the body carefully and found 2 magic items, which luckily remained intact from the fierce battle. One was a dark red bracelet, woven by some sort of fine red plant fiber. Although it looked rather plain, the bracelet possessed a great power of illusory flame that surprised Lucien quite a bit when he was examining it with his spiritual power. He believed that this bracelet was even more powerful than his Ice Revenger, and the bracelet was at least a level 2 high-rank magic item. The other thing Lucien found was an iron black dagger that felt very cold and sharp. Lucien put the bracelet and the dagger into the pockets of his robe. Standing up and looking around, he was quite sure that he could still find more magic items from these dead bodies scattered everywhere. In the next second, however, Lucien quickly dispelled this idea, warning himself not to be greedy. After crossing the river, Lucien found a place for a short rest in the Black Forest to recover his spiritual and physical power. During the break, he registered the inner magic structures of the flail, the bracelet, and the iron black dagger in his spirit library for a detailed analysis later. Then, Lucien buried the flail under a weird-shaped big cedar, and hid the bracelet and the dagger underneath a big rock. Without a deeper analysis, Lucien could not make sure that the magic items were clean and safe. If there were any trailing or locating marks on them, and if Lucien just took them back home carelessly, these things would become his catastrophe. Larnaca Canyon. In a dark corner in the canyon, Angola was grabbed by the neck and lifted up by a long and fair hand. The seemingly delicate hand was doing the job easily, as if it was picking up a little mouse instead of a level 7 great priest. "You can't kill me. You don't have to." Angola's voice squeezed out from his throat, filled with great fear and surprise. "Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid I have to." The voice was soft and sweet. "It's very impressive that you could escape from a Melton, one of the top 3 experts in tracking in the duchy. However, you still represent a great danger to us. If she finds you, all of us will be in deep trouble." "No, that's just your excuse," cried Angola. "We share the same goal, and we shall find the—" "That's enough, Angola. I'm fed up with the awful sulfur smell and the evil blood you all have." The soft voice cut him off. "You think we are allies? Don't be silly. I've changed my mind, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. Are you insane? You can't." Angola's voice came out from his throat with great difficulty. "You'll be punished. None of your business." The beautiful long hand tightened a bit, and Angola's body started to get dehydrated very fast. In the next second, the body exploded silently into fine, light yellow powder that spread through the air. "I can share a piece of news with you. For free, Angola." "Since you're dead already," said the soft voice, "Hathaway will soon be back from the secret dimension." Then, the beautiful pale hand disappeared in the darkness. 2 minutes later, a woman in cardinal clothes arrived. Floating in the air and looking around, her eyes were cold in contrast with her bright red robe. Angola disappeared. "Completely?" she murmured in a low voice. Running at full speed in the black forest, Lucien was like a white shadow. 20 minutes later, he saw the manor of House Hain. Lights were still on, and music was still playing. The big party was still going on around the midnight. And like what he was expecting, the heretic who had been trailing him all the time was still there observing the manor. But now it was Lucien that was watching him from behind. Had it novel been ad. If this heretic was caught by the church, Lucien would be in trouble for lying about how he awoke his blessing. As he was very close to the manor, Lucien needed to finish the heretic as quietly as possible. After estimating the heretic's level, he slowly approached him and silently activated darkness silently. The heretic looked very confused for a second, as all the light suddenly disappeared and the pure darkness pressed on his head. Then he sensed a magic wave coming from behind him. He was under attack. Because of Lucien's dark vision, the spell did not affect him at all. Before the heretic could see anything, Lucien's hands had already reached his neck. Crack! And that was the last thing the heretic heard in this world. Clown, Cannon Holder, Lind, Juliana, and Minsk gathered in front of the cabin. After the bitter fight, the great depression and tiredness on their faces were impossible to hide. When the night watchers were searching the underground complex and chasing the heretics, they were silently immersed in their mourning. Only 5 night watchers survived the battle, out of 30, who were all excellent and brave warriors in fighting against the darkness and evil. The 5 night watchers' guts were burning with anger and grief. "Clown, can you come and have a look?" Juliana noticed something on Fire Wolf's body. The end of the betrayer. "Professor." The scarlet words were like sharp knives stabbing in the 5 night watchers' hearts. Their anger almost burst out from their chests. It was this bloody professor who did all of this. It was him who set this horrible trap. The 5 night watchers were standing around the body like statues. Deep silence enwrapped everyone with tremendous pressure. In the darkness, Clown clenched his fists with rage and slowly squeezed out a word through his teeth. "Professor." Taking off the black gloves, Salvador, the cannon holder, put his bare hands on the chest and started to pray for the 25 deceased night watchers. His voice sounded very solemn. "You gain when you give. You live forever after you die. Paradise is open to you." Then Salvador pulled out his white handkerchief and tied it on his wrist, The day that I burn Professor to death will be the day I take this off. Following Salvador's suit, the Grand Knight, Len also tied on a white handkerchief and lowered his head. I'll never forget this battle, my fellows. This so-called professor will pay in blood. Professor is on the top of my target list, joined Juliana. Recalling the bitter battle, Juliana's heart was still filled with fear. She suffered the pain of watching her teammates dying one by one right in front of her eyes. She remembered the desperation she experienced when her healing spells became useless when facing the dark power. Although Juliana did hate Professor to the guts, she was also subconsciously afraid of him. Bastard! You bloody bastard! Clown could not hold himself back anymore. I'll find you and torture you. Wherever you go, whoever you are, I'll turn your body into my puppet, and I'll have your soul gnawed by the demons, suffering in hell. Clown never experienced such failure since he joined the Night Watch. As a level 5 Grand Knight, his confidence was ruined tonight. The forever smiling clown mask on his face looked rather strange and horrible in the darkness. It was my fault. I was so close to Professor. Mintz put on a white handkerchief as well. Clown slowly calmed down, then turned around to the other 4 Night Watchers. Professor must be leaving Altos soon. We should add Professor to our cleansing list and search him all over the continent. I'm afraid that the bastard is not qualified for this, said Lin with a bit of hesitation. After all, the names on the list were all extremely powerful. Some of them are even capable of changing the situation of the whole world. Professor. He is only a level 3 or 4 sorcerer. The cleansing list was shared by all the Inquisitions on the continent. Every name was regarded as a great trouble to the church and was continuously hunted by the most powerful pastors and night watchers from different Inquisitions. However, the list had not changed for many years, since hunting them down was extremely difficult. 25 night watchers died because of him, said Cannon Holder seriously. Although he's not even of a senior rank, his cruelty and slyness should not be underestimated. I see. Len nodded. We shall make a proposal to Cardinal Amelton, then. Let's find our teammates, at least part of them, said Salvador solemnly. It took Lucien a while to wipe out all the evidence, including the heretic's body and his own torn robe, and he also cleaned himself a bit. Then he came to the other side of the manor through the woods and climbed over the tall wall of the manor. Quietly and carefully, Lucien landed in the shadow of the 3-story house, covered by the tall, lush grass and bushes. When Lucien stood up and was patting away the dust on his hands, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. Good evening, Lucien. It was Rhine. He was only wearing a loose, dark red shirt, of which the top part was unbuttoned. His skin looked even paler than that of a noble lady in the moonlight. Good evening, Mr. Rhine. Seeing that it was Rhine, Lucien was a bit relieved, but he still remained cautious. You're still up? So are you? Rhines put on a meaningful smile. Lucien forced a smile on his face. If I told you that I'm wandering here to enjoy the beautiful silver moon tonight, would you believe my words? When he was talking, Lucien lowered his head and looked at himself. Parts of his lower arms were stained by muddy water, and his shirt was crumpled out of shape. Most importantly, as he looked up, Lucien found that the silver moon was hidden by the tall stone wall. What an excellent excuse it was. Yes, I believe your words because... Rhine shrugged his shoulders. I'm here for the moon as well. Ah! Lucien was suddenly at a loss. For sure. Did you see how charming, how bright the silver moon is tonight? Rhine raised his head and praised the stone wall, standing in front of him with affection. We are here for the same reason, aren't we? Well, Lucien took a longer breath and became serious. Can you tell me who you are, Mr. Rhine? As he could not pretend he was an innocent young man anymore, Lucien decided to ask Rhine directly, and he had the feeling that Rhine held no hostility toward him. I'm just a bard. Rhine shook his head. A bard who has nothing to do with the place you are longing for. And even if I tell you where it is, you are still not capable of going there. You can tell me now. At least I can have a more specific goal, asked Lucien eagerly. My suggestion is that you should work hard and become a real musician. Then you can travel to the many countries around the continent. That'll be a great benefit to your goal. Then Rhine turned around and left. Lucien was confused. Eager as he was, he knew that he must leave now. in case someone else showed up. After climbing into the guest room, Lucien put the 2 sapphires back into his pocket and lay down. At novel benet. What happened tonight already seemed like a dream to Lucien. Shutting down the brain and feeling the cozy blanket, he slowly fell into sleep. Lucien did not know how long his sleep lasted when he was awakened by a gentle knock at the door. "Who is that?" asked Lucien in a low voice. "It's me, Yvette. Do you want to take a walk with me to enjoy the fantastic silver moon tonight?" invited the noble lady in an alluring way. Lucien was a bit choked with what Yvette just said. He was already very impressed with the moon, and it seemed like everyone wanted to take a walk in the moonlight that night. "Well, I'm terribly sorry, Yvette. I twisted my ankle, and I'm feeling sleepy." Lucien refused her directly. "Maybe next time. Thank you for asking." Yvette slightly stamped her foot with disappointment and anger outside of Lucien's room. "Such an idiot. I bet you'll come to me and beg me on your own someday, Lucien." After hearing Yvette's steps leaving, Lucien lay down again to go back to sleep. "Lucien, look what you've just done. No wonder you have no girlfriend." A female voice came from the window. "You should learn from me. I always knock the door of Sylvia's room at midnight." It was Princess Natasha, who was standing on the windowsill, followed by Lady Camille floating in the air. With a long sword in one hand and her visor in the other hand, Natasha's purple hair was fluttering in the wind. The central part of her white armor was dark red, which was from the blood of a dragon. Noticing that Lucien was looking at her armor, Natasha smiled. "You like this armor, don't you? It's called Dragon Blood. I'm wearing it because I just came back from the battle with Argent Horn." Pausing a bit, Natasha continued. "By the way, Lucien, would you like to take a walk in the beautiful moonlight?" "Ah, did you see Joel, Elisa, and Ivan? Are they safe now? Where are they now?" Recovering from the surprise of suddenly seeing the princess on his windowsill, Lucien asked so eagerly that he forgot to use the proper salutation. Anyone who cared about his or her family would definitely react like this, and Lucien regarded them as his closest relatives in this world. Although he had killed Jansen and the squires in the dungeon, Lucien was still looking forward to the confirmation from the princess. After all, the battle tonight was so cruel that ordinary people like Joel, Elisa, and Ivan could easily become the innocent victims of the many powerful magic spells. "Well, I was fighting on the front line, Lucien," said Natasha, a bit embarrassed. "Sorry, I should have paid more attention to your family. But don't worry, Lucien. I did confirm with the knight who was responsible for saving the hostages, and they are safe. Thank you very much, Your Grace." A sincere smile appeared on Lucien's face. As his whole plan was like walking a tightrope, any tiny mistake could kill the people that he cared the most in this world. "Then where are they now? When I can see them?" Lucien asked again. "They are in the main cathedral right now, since they were tortured badly, both physically and mentally," Camille answered. "The pastors in the church will take care of them, and they need to be questioned later. But they are innocent. They're just ordinary people." Lucien shuddered to think of the questioning that he received, or say, the one this body once received from the church. "I know what you're worrying about, Lucien," Natasha comforted him. "Last time you were wronged as a suspect, but this time it's different. The church just wants to ask them some questions about the dungeon guards of Argent Horn. Nothing else." Then Natasha said to Lady Camille, "The power of a radiant knight is surely impressive. That sudden attack you launched toward the great priest was so powerful that the poor people in the dungeon were even knocked out. I wonder when I will become a radiant knight." May I ask what is Argent Horn?" asked Lucien purposefully. "It was Argent Horn that kidnapped your uncle and his family. They are followers of Demon, and they call themselves Argent Horn," explained Natasha. "Their souls are completely corrupted by darkness. When we were trying to catch the heretics alive, they shouted, 'Return to the eternal silence,' and blew themselves up." Speaking of this, Natasha's heart was still beating fast. Although she was only one step away from becoming a radiant knight and was quite experienced in fighting, the horrible scene of the heretics exploding themselves in front of her was still bothering the princess's mind. At novel benet. All of the heretics, they killed themselves? Lucien, of course, hoped that they were all dead, so the church and the princess would never know how he actually awoke his blessing. Most of the heretics died, and some of their leaders escaped, Then Natasha slightly raised her head and said with pride, "But I caught a priest alive. And we learned that the right hand of a powerful demon was sealed in the relic, but it was taken away by the heretics who escaped." Hearing that a heretic got caught, Lucian's heart skipped a beat. He quickly calmed down and asked, "Any other information?" "I'm afraid they're plotting something toward you and the Grand Duke." "Yes, they are planning on something big." Natasha touched her chin thoughtfully. "But only the great priests know the plan. We'll investigate the personnel of our intelligence department. I'm sure we can find more later," added Camille seriously. "I see. So I'm safe now, right?" asked Lucian, although he already knew the answer. He felt he could be a pretty good actor. "Although we did not find the person who was always watching you, I'm quite sure that you're safe now. After all, the heretics suffered a great loss tonight, and they are currently busy with running for their lives." Lucian nodded, putting on a relieved look. "Thank you, Lucian. Your information helped us a lot this time," said Natasha sincerely. "That's my pleasure." Lucian lowered his head and answered politely. At that moment, Camille's face darkened and her eyebrows frowned together, which made her look even more serious than usual. "What happened, Annie?" "Viscount Stewart killed himself before our people arrived, Your Grace," answered Camille in a low voice. Viscount Stewart was in charge of the intelligence department of the duchy, who was also a Grand Knight. Natasha waved her right hand, and her vambrace made a crisp clack. "Someone's behind Stewart. But why did Stewart betray us? Why he wanted to become the enemy of the church?" "We should go now, Your Grace," Camille reminded her. "Oh, I just realized that I'm still standing on the window. I gotta go now, Lucian." Natasha nodded to him. "The whole thing is even more complicated than I thought. And I'll tell the church that you've awakened your blessing under my help." Then she paused a bit and said to Lucian, "I'm sorry that I cannot make you a knight and give you a title, since according to the law, you're not as powerful as a knight yet. Besides, making you a knight at this time might put you at great risk. I hope you understand." "I totally understand, Your Grace," answered Lucian. "Your trust is the most important thing to me, and my family is safe. I cannot ask for more. I'll reward you with a manor several months later." "You have my word," said Natasha. "A manor? Your Grace, that's too much." Lucian refused subconsciously, knowing that he would be leaving Altos sooner or later. Money was better than a manor to him. Natasha waved her hands and insisted, "House Violet always pays. It's our royal tradition. By the way, how did you find out the approximate location, Lucian?" "I saw a special kind of long-tailed tit in the ball." Lucian was prepared for this question, and thus lied without any hesitation. "When I was too poor to feed myself, I often went to the Black Forest for the wild mushrooms, and I saw them a few times. Around Alto, these birds only live around Melzer Black Forest and Lubeck Mountain." "Interesting. Never heard it before." Natasha nodded. "Besides the manor, you should have a knight's sword." "I'll find you one, Lucian." "Thank you so much, Your Grace." Lucian bowed to the princess. Natasha took a step backward and floated in the air. Although she was not a radiant knight, her dragon blood armor could help her fly. "Remember to take a walk in the moonlight, Lucian." Natasha laughed and then flew away with Camille. After watching them leave, Lucian released a long sigh of relief. Suddenly, he felt very exhausted. Close to the dark mountain range, the silver-robed great priest Ilya was standing on a rock, looking down at the few heretics kneeling on the ground. The rage of the great priest was horrible. The huge rock started to crack from his dark power. "Who can tell me? What the hell happened?" Ilya was shouting like a wounded beast. "They suffered a great loss tonight. The power of Argent Horn in the duchy was almost annihilated. The number of the members who survived was less than 10, including a level 5 Dark Knight, Dragon, 2 High Priests, 3 ordinary priests, and an ordinary Dark Knight. Years of Ilya's hard work were ruined overnight. Now his body was covered by a layer of black fire with a strong smell of sulfur. As the silver had slipped down, Ilya's face was revealed. There were 2 goat horns on his head, and his eyes were bloody red. The knights and the priests kneeling in front of him didn't dare to look up. After a while, Ilya calmed himself down and put the hood on again. Then he asked, "Who can tell me why the church and House Violet were there tonight?" The so-called professor. He was escaping from the church tonight, and somehow he found the underground palace. That's what I know, answered Dragan carefully. After a moment of silence, Ilya shouted again. Then who's that bloody professor? The Night Watcher said that this professor might come from the Continental Congress of Magic, answered Dragan. Actually, we got the news that professor was going to meet a sorcerer apprentice somewhere in the Black Forest. Since it was very far from us, UF **** king idiots. Ilya almost wanted to tear Dragan into pieces. Knowing that he said something stupid, Dragan lowered his head and dared not contradict the great priest. In Dragan's mind, it was just impossible for them to block the whole Black Forest and drive all the people in the forest away. Professor, he did this on purpose? Gnashing his teeth, Ilya said slowly, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, even without getting any blood on his own hands. But why he did this? But I thought the Congress of Magic was on our side, asked a level 5 priest with confusion. Internal conflict is everywhere, sneered Ilya. At it novel been at. Then Ilya turned around and started to pray to the great master of Argent, seeking for the revelation from his god. All the followers started to pray as well. A black shadow came out from Ilya's silver robe and gradually covered all of them. In the darkness, all the followers present heard a deep voice in their mind, but only Ilya could understand the message. Soon the shadow disappeared, and Ilya stood up. He raised his right hand high and said to all the followers, "The great master of Argent assured me that despite the setback we suffered tonight, we'll still be able to accomplish the task and build the great realm for our true God on the ground. May you walk on the ground as you walk in your realm," responded the other followers in an encouraged way. The great master also showed me a prophecy. A falling star has brought the chaos. The throne of fate has lost its master. The nonbeliever who walks in light and darkness will make his debut. What does it mean? Asked Dragan. It's like a poem. The devil's sullied alto. We cannot see it clearly. Ilya shook his head. Fate and time were the hardest to understand. Even the greatest prophet was like an ordinary person when facing a huge mountain, and all he or she could see was only a very small part of it. Lucian slept very well last night. He woke up with the pleasant twitter of birds around 8 in the morning. The ball ended very late. Many people were still in their beds. Thus, no one urged Lucian to go for breakfast. It was the first time Lucian enjoyed such nice and soft blankets since he crossed over to this world. Thus, it took Lucian more than half an hour to actually get up and get dressed. When Lucian was walking downstairs, a maid came to him and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Evans. What do you want to have for breakfast?" "Bread, cheese sausage, with milk, please," answered Lucian. He ordered a rich breakfast since he had a pretty good workout last night. "Sure." The maid nodded. "You'd like to have the breakfast in the dining room or your own room, sir?" Lucian glanced at the dining room downstairs and saw Ryan was sitting there. "Dining room, thank you." When Lucian entered the dining room, Ryan was sending a piece of rare-cooked steak into his mouth. "Morning, Lucian," greeted Ryan. "You really should try the steak, very juicy." Lucian took an opposite seat and said to the maid, "A steak for me, please. Medium." Then Lucian turned to Ryan and smiled. "Good breakfast starts a good day. Also a perfect supplement for a good workout," said Ryan meaningfully. Evans, Yvette is like a beast. A young nobleman was sitting beside them. He laughed a bit, but had clearly misunderstood their conversation. "Come on, I'll buy. I didn't do anything last night." Lucian was introduced to this young man last night by Felicia. "I hurt my ankle." "I see. No wonder." Albai laughed even harder. "No wonder Yvette went for hunting very early this morning, and she looked angry." "Good for you, Lucian." The breakfast was pleasant. Seeing that Ryan almost finished his food, Lucian asked hurriedly, "Can you tell me where it is, the dream-like place that you mentioned to me last night? Since it's as beautiful as paradise, I'll tell you the location after you can hold your own concert." As an award, Ryan smiled in a cunning way. To him, it was very interesting to see Lucian's growth. After Ryan left, Albai asked Lucian curiously, "Where's that place you were talking about?" "I don't know. He won't tell me right now," answered Lucian, shrugging his shoulders. What he knew was that his life had better go back to normal, at least for a period of time, to meet Ryan's requirement as soon as possible. Firstly, Lucien had to abandon the pseudonym Professor. Finishing his breakfast, Lucien saw a sleepy Felicia coming downstairs. He greeted, "Good morning, Felicia." "Morning, Lucien." "How's her ankle?" asked her. "It's fine now," answered Lucien. "I'm sorry, Felicia. I'm afraid I cannot go hunting today. I have to go now to deal with some of my personal stuff." "What happened?" Felicia asked with concern. "Sorry, but I have to keep it a secret, Felicia." Lucien put on a slightly awkward look, since it has something to do with the princess. "Sure, Lucien." Felicia was a bit surprised for a moment. "I'll send a coach for you." Getting on the coach, Lucien asked the coachman to go to Lord Ven's manor first. The coachman was so experienced that Lucien did not feel the road bumpy at all. Having lots of issues troubling his mind, by the time Lucien stopped thinking, the coach was already in front of Lord Ven's manor. "Mr. Evans, we've arrived. Do you need me to tell the guards?" The coachman turned around and asked Lucien politely. An elegant gentleman usually did not talk to ordinary guards. "No, thanks." Lucien smiled. "My friend is a squire here. We're equal." With his awakened blessing, Lucien was only a step away from becoming a knight. However, in his mind, he and John were simply good friends, and there was no level or class difference between them. It was Ian and Durago who were guarding the gate today. Immediately, they puffed out their chests when they saw the fine coach with the coat of arms of Firebull, ready to welcome the guest. They were very surprised when they saw Lucien again. They still remembered him. In their memory, Lucien was only a pauper who did not show much respect to them, and now in the white shirt and black suit, the young man looked like a decent noble. They did not come to themselves until Lucien was standing in front of them. "So, sorry, are you looking for John?" "Yes, please." Lucien did not recognize them. When Ian was about to go into the manor, Durago asked with a bit hesitation, "Excuse me, sir. Are you Mr. Evans?" After the great success of the concert, even John, as a very moderate young man, could not help himself sharing what he knew about Lucien and all the praises his good friend received from the Grand Duke, the Grand Cardinal, and Princess. "Yes, I'm John's friend," answered Lucien. "Your work, Fate, was played on Lord Ven's banquet several days ago. It was fantastic," Durago said to Lucien with great excitement. "I'm so sorry that I was being really rude to you." This big tough guy was very sincere and excited. Lucien sort of recalled the conflict that happened between them before and was quite surprised that Durago was this enthusiastic about music. Soon Lucien realized Alto was indeed the city of song. "It's okay. I'm glad you like my work," answered Lucien politely. Standing beside Durago, Ian put on an embarrassed smile. After the concert, Lucien experienced a big change in the way many people treated him. Durago's sincere apology and all the flattering words triggered Lucien's thought. The sudden upgrade in his social status turned what happened several months ago into a distant dream. "Mr. Evans, can I invite you to my place?" asked Durago, rubbing his hands nervously with excitement. Finding a random excuse, Lucien refused him politely, but he felt quite awkward. Soon John came following Ian, looking a bit confused. "Lucien, I'm going back home later this afternoon. Has anything happened?" "Yes, but it has been solved." "No worries." Lucien pulled John's arm. "Let's get on the coach first." The old coachman was smart enough to know that he should not be listening to the conversation. So he tied the horses firmly to the hitching post, walked away from the coach, and took out his tobacco under a big tree. When John was listening to Lucien, his face darkened and his brows knotted. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his hands so tightly that his whole body was shaking. When he heard that his parents' fingers were cut, his teeth were gnashing. However, John did not say even a single word. He remained silent and listened carefully. "I'm terribly sorry, John," said Lucien, whose heart was full of guilt. Lowering his head, John did not answer immediately. Lucien knew that his friend needed some time to recover from his pain and great anger. So he remained silent with John. After a while, John finally started to talk. "Lucien, it's not your fault. I don't blame you." That was the first thing John said to Lucien. Instead of venting his frustration, John chose to comfort his best friend to free him of his horrible guilt. Lucien was quite surprised, and he was touched. "Thank you so much, John. What you just said means a lot to me." When John was about to go back to ask for a longer leave from his duty, Lucien stopped him. "Wait, John. Here's 20 grams of moonlight rose dust." Lucien pulled out the small black bag and handed it over to his friend. John had heard just now where did the moonlight rose come from. After more than 10 seconds, he firmly took the small bag from Lucien's hand. "Thank you, Lucien. I'll awake my blessing. Only this way I can protect my family and friends," said John seriously. "No rush. Follow Lord Ven's instruction and take your time." Lucien nodded. "Also, can you keep this a secret? After all, I lied to the princess about how I got these roses. You know me, Lucien. I'm more reliable than a dead man." John patted his friend on the shoulder and promised seriously. The arrival of the House Haynes coach caused a stir in Audiobook, the poorest district in the whole city. Although most of them could not name all the coat of arms of the big families in Alto, they still registered in mind those of the few most powerful noble families. Joel, Elisa, and Ivan had been sent back home by the church. The pastors did not find much valuable information with them. Seeing John and Lucien getting off the coach, Ivan suddenly burst out crying, as if the little boy was trying to wash away all the horrible memories with his tears. John gently patted Ivan's head and gave him a firm hug. "It's okay now, Ivan. You're already a grown-up man, and you did a great job. God bless us." Lucien hugged Joel and Elisa. His apology, worry, and joy were all in this big hug. "It's not your fault, Lucien." Joel and Elisa comforted him. "And you see, we're fine now." As the hostages of the vicious heretics, they did not expect that they could survive in the end. When they were saved, they were so grateful to the God of truth that now they became even more understanding and tolerant. After all, nothing else really mattered when facing death. Then Elisa and Joel told Lucien what the church and the intelligence department of the duchy questioned them. The thing that concerned the pastors and the intelligence the most was why Elisa and Joel passed out outside of the cell, but were found by the knight inside of the cell later. As the great thunder caused by Lady Camille's power knocked them out instantly, no hostages present could provide any valuable information. In the end, the people from the church and the intelligence department were guessing that it was probably because the heretics first locked the hostages back in case they would escape, and later on they did not have enough time to come back and kill them all. "We got really lucky there. Thank God." Drying her eyes, Elisa was telling Lucien the story. At this time, there came a knock on the door. It was Corella and a church guard that Lucien did not know. Lucien was a bit more relieved seeing that the church only sent a knight squire there, which meant he was not really suspicious to the church. After a short and regular investigation, Corella stood up and thanked Lucien on behalf of the church. "The bishop appreciated what you did. Without your information, we would have suffered a greater loss." Lucien's musician identity made it almost impossible for the church to draw a link between Professor and the princess' personal consultant. However, there were still some coincidences which involved Lucien that they were unable to explain right now. Lucien finally came back to his normal life, busy with studying music and magic. He also asked Joel and his family to move into his new house temporarily, since Gassou was way safer than Audieron. At Novel Benedette. In these days, Lucien did not take even a single glance at the broken wall, where he usually left secret messages to communicate with the apprentices. To be prudent, he also left aside his plan of destroying his magic lab for the time being. This day, Victor started to teach them canon, a contrapuntal compositional technique that employed a melody with imitations of it played after a given duration. With just a few rules, even beginners could achieve much with canon. "Actually, you've subconsciously employed canon in your Symphony of Fate, Lucien," commented Victor. "It looks like you learned a lot in the library of the association." Yes, I guess." "Thank you, Mr. Victor," answered Lucien, a bit absent-minded. His mind was occupied by the thought that he needed to come up with enough music works for holding a concert to meet Rhine's requirement. 80 years ago, someone produced a piece of music work which was very similar to the well-known Pachelbel's canon or Canon and Jagan D in his original world. However, he could still rewrite Pachelbel's canon into a piece of piano concerto. Although he still needed some more original pieces of music for a personal concert, Recomposing was definitely the best time-saving way for Lucien to have his repertoire as soon as possible. At the end of the class, Victor said to his students, "I know many of you are hardworking, and some of you have been studying canon on your own for a while. I'd like to see every one of you try to write a piece of canon to facilitate your understanding toward this compositional technique." While the other students were pretty excited about it, Lucien remained silent with his own thoughts. Seeing that, Victor said to Lucien, "Lucien, although you're indeed very talented, don't underestimate canon. Simple as it seems to be, an outstanding piece of canon can still become a masterpiece that lasts for generations, just like Mr. Hersey's canon in D. And practicing canon is very beneficial to a student like you who don't have a very solid music foundation." Victor was often mindful of giving Lucien, the young genius, some proper warning to avoid his possible arrogance, which was very common among musicians who became famous at an early age, and unfortunately most of them ended up wasting their talent and lost their reputation very quickly. Not until Victor started to talk to him did Lucien come to himself. He nodded and explained, "Thank you, Mr. Victor. I understand how important a solid foundation is, and I'll definitely go all out to work on my canon." "Good. Then what were you thinking about?" asked Victor. "When you were introducing Mr. Hersey's canon in D, I was thinking that I could probably recompose this classic piece of work and turn it into a piano concerto. Maybe a piano concerto version of canon in D will be quite unique." "Interesting idea, Lucien." Victor touched his chin a bit when he was thinking. The challenging part is that Mr. Hersey's canon is composed of very short music bars, thus it's hard to make considerable changes within it. "Do you think it's doable, Mr. Victor?" asked Lucien with expectation. "Well, canon in D was recomposed into a few different versions before, so I'd say a piano concerto version is definitely something to look forward to." Victor confirmed Lucien's idea and smiled. After the class, when the students were heading toward the practicing rooms, Felicia caught up with Lucien and asked him in a low voice with expectation, "Are you going to play the piano concerto version of canon in D on my birthday party next month?" Canon was not a very demanding nor complicated technique. She did not think it would take Lucien too long to do it. Lucien was suddenly inspired. Then he smiled. "Felicia, I won't forget the help you offered me. I'll play the piano on your birthday party, but not a canon. I'll compose a piece of serenade for you." "Really?" That was a big surprise for Felicia, the fact that the personal music consultant of the princess would write a piece of serenade specially for her was totally beyond her expectation. "Yes, but it won't be a very complete one since the time is quite limited. It's probably only an opusculum." "You're so great, Lucien." Felicia was excited, but also feeling a bit concerned. "But you only have a month. If the work is not good enough, that might damage your reputation." Although composing a piece of opusculum within a month was not rare, Felicia still worried about Lucien. Since Lucien was drawing so much attention right now after the concert, many people who envied his talent were watching him like vicious beasts at night, waiting for any possible chance to launch their attack and to give this young musician a hard time. A piece of serenade shouldn't be a problem. Lucien seemed to be quite confident. And Lucien's confidence came from the fact that he already found a very classic piece of serenade in his spirit library, which resembled no music work in this world. In order to avoid being too suspicious, Lucien decided only to do an opusculum on the birthday party. "All right, I'm looking forward to your serenade," said Felicia with both expectation and concern. In the following month, except for analyzing magic spells and reading the book named Astrology and Magic Elements written in the ancient Sylvanus language with the help of the witch's note at night, Lucien spent all his time on studying music and composing his canon and the serenade. After all, music now could provide him with the chance to find the headquarters of the Congress of Magic. With his hard work and great memory, Lucien now finally felt he was qualified enough as a music student. Within this month, he also successfully recomposed canon in D and finished the serenade for Felicia's birthday. Meanwhile, John was still working on his night training. Although he wanted to awaken his blessing as soon as possible, he was warned by Lord Vin that, without a solid foundation, the awakening would be very likely to fail. Even if he succeeded this time, his future growth would be very limited. Thus, John was being very patient, even though that meant he needed to do the same training over and over again every day. In John's spare time, he would go into the Black Forest to fight with goblins and cynocephalus to gather more experience. At the same time, Lord Vin gave John a sum of money and asked him to rent a unit in the administrative district in order to protect his family. Although Joel and his family had a pretty good time in Lucien's house, they were definitely even happier with their own place, especially since it was a place that was earned by their son. Therefore, they soon moved out of Lucien's house, and Lucien respected their choice. After all, they were family, and that would never change, no matter if they lived together or not. The last Thursday of the month of gold, October. War Gallery. I'm finally satisfied with this part. Natasha just finished her discussion with Lucien about a movement. Now this part is exciting enough to meet the theme. The last version was pretty good already. Lucien smiled. You indeed have very high expectations on yourself, Your Grace. Natasha's music knowledge was actually way more profound than Lucien's. By working together, Lucien also learned a lot from the princess. Well, if you do something, then you do your best, said Natasha in a good mood. Yes, Your Grace, Lucien agreed. When Lucien was about to leave, Natasha asked him with curiosity, I heard that you wrote a new serenade for your classmate's birthday party tonight? Yes, Lucien nodded. Pointing at the piano standing in the center of the room, Natasha asked, Can I listen to it first? I'm sorry, Your Grace. It's a gift for Felicia's birthday. Lucien refused the princess politely. Well, I guess. Natasha took a few steps back and forth. Although I'm very curious, I think you're right. I feel like writing a love serenade for Sylvia's birthday, too. That's very considerate. Lucien was almost used to it now. At this time, Natasha turned around and said something to Lady Camille. Camille left the room and, a moment later, came back with a fine sword in her hand. This is the knight's sword that I promised you, said Natasha. Its name is Alert, and it's a level 1 high-rank sword with an extraordinary quality. With Alert, your instincts will be way sharper, making you more aware of any approaching danger. Since it was not an investiture, the manners were not of great complexity. Lucien saluted the princess with a knight's etiquette, and the princess leaned the sword against Lucien's shoulder. May your sword guard your will, said Natasha seriously. Then Lucien took the sword from Natasha's hands and followed her instruction to leave a willpower mark on Alert. Alert was of an ordinary level 1 knight's attack force, and it could help its owner to be as sensitive to the surroundings as a level 2 knight. While sorcerers called them magic weapons, the nobles and pastors called them extraordinary weapons, which did not require registration in their owner's spirit. The owner of an extraordinary weapon or item just needed to leave a mark of his or her willpower to activate it. However, according to some makers' will, some of these weapons or items rejected certain kinds of users and their power could not be activated. Carrying the sword, Lucien saluted the princess again and left the room. Watching Lucien leave, Natasha said to Camille gently, You have any plans for this evening, Annie? In preparation for the birthday party that night, Felicia did not attend the class today. During the break, Lot and Lucien were chatting casually. Lot told Lucien that this was Felicia's 18th birthday, and this was her coming-of-age ceremony. Thus many nobles and all the musicians of the association would be present. Adet Novel Ben Adet, are you feeling nervous? After all, this is your first performance after the concert, asked Lot. In order to make sure Lucien could focus on studying music after his success, Victor was protecting Lucien with great caution. On behalf of his student, Victor turned down many invitations and offers for Lucien, and that made many people feel even more curious about this young, talented musician. Not really, answered Lucien in a relaxed way. I don't think there'll be that many guests tonight, though. At least some of them will be there, just because of your birthday gift for Felicia, the new serenade. Herodotus, who was usually very quiet, joined their conversation and commented in a calm voice. They're hoping to see what you can present a whole month after the concert. I agree with Herodotus, said Lot. As the current host of House Hain, Felicia's uncle should be there tonight, too. Hopefully he won't find an excuse to give Felicia and her parents a hard time. Well, we'll see then, said Lucien thoughtfully. In the early evening, Lucien got on the coach and headed toward the house where Felicia lived. This time he hired his own coach and felt a bit proud of it. By the time Lucien arrived, It was already very busy in front of the luxury three-story house. Lots of well-dressed ladies and gentlemen were getting off their coaches, chatting and laughing. The house was originally built by the old count to host parties. Through the gate, Lucien walked on the path and went through the garden. Then he saw Felicia was standing in front of the hallway. She was welcoming the guests accompanied by her mother, wearing another bright red dress tonight. Red was Househane's color, and the color always suited her very well. "Thank you for coming, Lucien," said Felicia sincerely. "Lots of famous musicians came here tonight because of you, including Christopher, the president of the association. I'm quite sure they came because of you." Lucien smiled and kissed Felicia's hand without his lips actually touching the hand to show his politeness. "Welcome, Lucien. We're all talking about you recently. You're such a genius." Felicia's mother greeted him. Felicia really looked like her mother, except for the hair, since her mother's was brown. Lucien nodded to them and entered the hall. Lots of guests were holding their cups and talking to each other. It was a perfect chance for socializing. "Hi, Evans." Many people greeted Lucien when he was walking. Their facial expressions varied. Some of them looked excited and curious, while some were throwing Lucien meaningful and unfriendly looks. What would the so-called most gifted and creative genius ever present tonight? Everyone was waiting for Lucien's new serenade. Among those serenades made for parties, good ones seldom appeared, since their themes and styles were rather limited. Many musicians commented that these serenades were not even close to being elegant. Thus, many of them tonight were actually expecting Lucien's failure tonight, and then they could teach this young genius a lesson. Christopher, who was surrounded by many musicians, said to the many musicians who did not have much hope in Lucien, "He's still young, and we shouldn't be too critical with those younger musicians. We shall applaud for their success, and also be more tolerant of their failure. Just leave them some space." When Lucien came over, the musicians ended the topic and started to talk about music creation. Lucien took a cup of water from a waiter and listened to their conversation quietly and politely a few steps away. Several elder musicians noticed that and significantly changed their attitude toward Lucien, since clearly he was not one of those young musicians who instantly become very arrogant after making some achievement. Then Victor, Rhine, Lot, and some other of Lucien's classmates arrived too. It was already 7:30 in the evening, but Count Hain was still not there. The atmosphere started to become a bit awkward. Felicia's father, Urbain, looked very embarrassed. He was also very angry with Scott, his brother. Despite all the conflict they had in the past, Felicia is Scott's niece, and today was her 18th birthday. It was the current Count Hain's responsibility to show up and send his best wishes to Felicia. Urbain was really angry with his brother. Wringing her hands, Felicia looked embarrassed to the point of almost bursting into tears. On this occasion, Count Hain's absence definitely would do damage to her reputation among the nobles. 10 minutes later, the steward of Count Hain finally arrived and said to Urbain in a polite but also cold manner, "Lord Hain will not be able to come tonight, since he's sick." Urbain's face looked very gloomy, and he was so choked that he could not even say a single word. A few high-status nobles who were close to Count Hain were waiting in their houses, since they were not sure if they should attend the party or not. After confirming that Count Hain would not be there tonight, several servants who were waiting outside of the party house secretly left to report this to their masters. Fortunately, some other nobles were still coming, since Urbain was still the clerk of the town hall. Taking a deep breath, Urbain asked his daughter to stay calm and continue to welcome the guests. Too bad. If a family member is held in detestation by the host of the family, unless the member could awaken his or her blessing and become a knight, the family member would always have a hard time in whatever they want to do. A musician named Kamat said to Lucien in a meaningful way. Lucien pretended that he did not get it. "I believe no matter what a person wants to do, as long as he or she is persistent enough and works really hard, the person can be successful." His voice was a bit loud, and it could be clearly heard since the hall was relatively quiet from the weird atmosphere. Felicia heard what Lucien just said, and the fact that Lucien made such an achievement from scratch cheered her up. As a noble lady from one of the most important families in the Duchy of Orvret, Felicia was way more privileged than her classmate, and there was no reason for her to easily give up her dream. After a while, Othello, the director of the association, came to Lucian, followed by Mackenzie Griffith and 3 young men. Mackenzie greeted the other musicians present and introduced the 3 young men to Lucian. Mr. Clement, Mr. Barrett, and Mr. Julian are from Tria. They've read all the reviews of Symphony of Fate on Music Criticism and Symphony News, and they come here especially for you, Lucian. I'm glad to meet you. Thank you so much for coming. Lucian shook hands with them one by one. The 3 young musicians from Tria were all in their early 20s. Dressing tastefully, they were all very decent young men. Your teacher, Francois, had already introduced all of you to me through a letter he wrote. Christopher recalled their names. I've listened to your music works before. All of you are very talented. Francois was born in the kingdom of Syracuse. When he was a teenager, Francois came to Alto to study music and then achieved great success in music in his late 20s. A few years ago, Francois went back to Syracuse and became the prime music consultant for the royal family. The 3 young musicians hurriedly saluted Christopher, who was known as the living music legend, with great respect. Mackenzie said to Lucian with malicious intention, I hope your serenade surprises everyone here tonight. Genius. A serenade? I have a piece of serenade for Miss Hayne tonight, too. The black-haired Julian was the most talented and also the most arrogant one among the 3. We can present our serenades together. Mackenzie seemed to be relatively acquainted with Julian. When Lucian was about to answer, the whole hall suddenly quieted down. The sword alert Lucian was wearing reminded him that someone he knew was coming. Lucian turned around and saw a luxury coach stopping in front of the steps on the other end. A tall, purple-haired beauty in her white uniform and black long boots was walking toward Felicia, with a pretty young lady walking with her arm in arm, while Camille was quietly following behind. Your Grace! Felicia exclaimed with great surprise. Hi, Felicia. Happy birthday. Standing in front of Felicia, Natasha smiled. Sorry that I came without being invited. No. It's my great pleasure, Your Grace. Felicia was almost too excited to speak properly. I really wanted to invite you, Your Grace. But I'm not qualified. I know. Natasha gently touched Felicia's hair and comforted her. Don't call me Your Grace. Just call me Natasha like many years ago when we were playing together in the manor. I remember that back in the days when the old Count was still alive, we always went hunting with Uncle Samuel, Alfred, and Harrington. I was so short and always fell over. All those memories came back to Felicia. I cried a lot. Yes, you did. And 10 years later, you're turning 18? Natasha's heart was also softened by those memories. Alfred and Uncle Samuel must be very happy in heaven seeing you become such a gorgeous, noble lady. Alfred was the eldest son of the Grand Duke, Natasha's elder brother, who was also a level 5 Grand Knight in his early 20s. Samuel was the elder brother of the current Count Hayne and Urbane Hayne, who was the first heir of House Hayne's title. Both of them died in the battle with the Heretic Knights almost 10 years ago. 10 years changed a lot. Felicia's father did not manage to inherit the title, and Natasha turned from a little girl into a real warrior after her elder brother died. All the friends back in the old days gradually drifted away from each other, and those beautiful days would never come back again. Before the princess arrived, Felicia was forcing herself to smile in order to welcome the guests and keep the party going, although she was facing great disappointment and anger. Now, different emotions mixed together in her mind, and she could not hold her tears back anymore. I'm so happy you're here tonight, Natasha. Don't cry, Felicia. Natasha gave Felicia a big, warm hug. You're my younger sister. As Count Hayne is sick tonight, I'll host your coming-of-age ceremony tonight. Yes, Your Grace. Felicia sniffed and put on a smile. I'm so honored that the princess is going to host my ceremony. Natasha also had tears in her eyes, but she was trying to cheer Felicia up. And my personal music consultant is going to present you with a beautiful piece of serenade. In her mind, Natasha was blaming Lucian for tempting her to attend the party tonight with his new serenade. As a Grand Knight, she did not expect that she would cry when she saw Felicia, and that made her feel very shy. Natasha and Lucian were getting more and more like friends after what happened with the heresy. Mentioned by the princess, Lucian suddenly captured a lot of attention from the nobles and musicians present. Now all of the guests were expecting Lucian's serenade tonight. Welcome, Your Grace. Welcome, Lady Camille, Lady Sylvia. Urbane was also excited and led the princess into the hall. All the nobles and musicians were saluting the princess. Natasha was fed up with all the noble manners, but was still smiling and nodding politely toward them. Sylvia, while holding the princess's arm, was very nervous and her face flushed, since it was her first time showing up in public with Natasha like this, facing lots of musicians she knew. Mr. Christopher, good evening, Sylvia greeted her teacher. Looking at his student coming together with the princess, Christopher paused a bit as if he wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. He just simply said, "Good evening, Sylvia. There are several musicians here tonight, and I know you're very interested in this new music instrument." Natasha had previously told Lucien that Sylvia was interested in his new fingerings, but also that she might be too shy to talk to him. So Lucien took the initiative to talk to her. Sylvia was encouraged and started to share her understanding of piano with Lucien. Adet novel Benadet. The three musicians coming from Tria were completely ignored. They were a bit pissed off, but there was not much they could do. After all, no one really knew them in alto. However, their angry faces amused Mackenzie, standing on the other side. When they heard that the princess went to the party tonight, many nobles rushed to come. Thus, the ceremony was put off for half an hour. The coming-of-age ceremony was not complicated. Taking a flame-like flower and the badge of Househane from Felicia's mother, Natasha put them on the left side of Felicia's chest and delivered a short speech. Then Natasha invited Felicia for an opening dance, which was the last part of the ceremony. The dance was just gorgeous. As a level 5 Grand Knight, Natasha was excellent in strength, agility, and coordination. Led by the princess, Felicia presented the best dance in her life so far. Then it should be Lucien's turn to present his new serenade for Felicia. However, at this time, Julien came to the center of the hall. "Your Grace, distinguished guests, I'm Julien from the Palace of Tria. I'm sorry that I just came here tonight with Mr. Griffith without Lady Felicia's invitation. Here I want to present Lady Felicia with a piece of my newly written serenade in order to bring all my best wishes. It seems like our talented young musician is having an unexpected challenger here." Natasha lifted her eyebrows and said to Lucien in a low voice. Lucien shrugged his shoulders a bit. He did not really care. Natasha nodded. "Well, then let's welcome Julien from Tria." Handing his sheets of music to the band, Julien was waiting for them to get prepared. Julien was quite excited since the music genre of serenade was Tria's forte. In this world, serenade was originally a music genre performed for expressing love or affection, which was considered a suitable kind of music piece for the evening. As there were many nobles who were fond of chasing different music trends, the style of serenade also changed over time and was played more and more often over evening parties. In Alto, the city of Psalm, serenade was never really mainstream. Instead, symphony and concerto were more popular as they were always regarded as more solemn and elegant. When they were talking about piano fingerings, Sylvia smiled to her teacher and said, "I've seen Mr. Julien's serenade in your office before, and indeed it's very suitable for playing on evening parties." Christopher immediately understood the intention of her words. He shook his head and smiled. Several of the famous musicians present like Othello and Victor smiled with the president as well. What Sylvia was actually saying was that Julien's work was to some extent too shallow to be presented on formal occasions. On the other hand, Barrett and Clement, the two musicians who were visiting Alto for the first time, were not quite sure about the connotation of Sylvia's words. Lucien did not realize the meaning of Sylvia's comment until he saw the other musician's meaningful smile. Maybe it was Lucien's friendly attitude that won Sylvia's preference for him over Julien. At that time, Julien picked up his violin and his playing started. The beginning of his serenade surprised many of the traditional musicians present, including Christopher, Othello, and Victor. Julien recomposed his music work and made it relatively solemn and serious. An interested smile emerged on Natasha's face. She has always loved surprises. Sylvia, standing beside her, looked more confused than surprised. Julien was indeed a genius. The combination of the pleasant features of serenade and the solemnity of orchestra in his music work impressed every musician present at the party. During the second movement of Julien's serenade, Even the President Christopher smiled and praised. This part is challenging, but Julian handled it very well. Clement and Barrett gave Julian an admiring glance, since a good comment from the president of the Musicians Association of Alto meant a lot for a young musician. The gentle and elegant lento was followed by a more cheerful allegro, designed for the evening party. The playing ended in a pleasant and high-spirited atmosphere. Warm applause came to Julian. Felicia, as the host of the coming-of-age ceremony and the evening party, thanked Julian. "I appreciate your gift a lot, Mr. Julian. It's very impressive as a piece of serenade. It's my great pleasure playing for you, Miss Hayne." Julian kissed Felicia's hand and bowed to her. "May your beauty and happiness always be with you." Then he left the dancing floor and rejoined the musicians with a big smile on his face, knowing that the piece of serenade which took him more than 5 months to accomplish was acknowledged by the many musicians in alto. Although the playing was not perfect because of the lack of practicing of the band, Julian still achieved success. Awesome, elegant, passionate. No one can compete with you in the field of serenade. While Mackenzie was complimenting Julian, his eyes were peeking at Lucien. However, Lucien did not care. Lucien never regarded himself as a real musician. Othello, as the director of the association, also extended his congratulation. After Othello, Sylvia expressed her different opinion with a gentle smile. Impressive as it is, the pace of the serenade in general is a bit sluggish and the structure is not well designed. Well, Julian felt a bit embarrassed. What you just said? The problems you just mentioned are relatively inevitable for a serenade, aren't they? Christopher was a bit surprised that his student, who was always nice and gentle, was this aggressive and sharp tonight. Thus, he took a step forward and took over the conversation. "Anyway, this is a piece of serenade with outstanding quality." "Thank you." Julian's big smile came back again. He could already see the prosperous future that awaited him as a very famous musician in alto. Then suddenly he turned around and said to Lucien in an arrogant intonation, "Now it's your turn, Mr. Evans." At this time, Felicia's mother said to all the guests, "Thank you, Mr. Julian. Thank you for your passionate playing. In this beautiful evening, Mr. Lucien Evans, as my daughter's music classmate, will also present us a piece of bagatelle as well. Adet novel benedet." Lucien's name caused a stir in the crowd. Yes, the Mr. Lucien Evans, the young talented musician who composed Symphony of Fate. Felicia's mother introduced with pride. Lucien tidied his clothes a bit and was about to walk to the center of the hall when Mackenzie said to him in an ill-intentioned way, "Hope you don't press the wrong key, Lucien." Natasha took a glance at Mackenzie and lifted her eyebrows, and then looked at Lucien. She had confidence in Lucien since she had seen Lucien playing piano several times after he awoke his blessing, and his playing skill had improved a lot. "Don't let Natasha down," Sylvia said to Lucien in a low voice. "You're Natasha's musician consultant." Lucien was not bothered by Mackenzie. He nodded to Natasha, Sylvia, and his teacher, Mr. Victor, and then walked toward the center of the hall where a piano was placed. Victor raised his glass toward his student as his encouragement. Felicia was a bit nervous, since she was not sure whether playing a piece of bagatelle tonight was a good idea. Now in comparison to Julian's serenade, any flaw in Lucien's playing might be exaggerated. The applause to welcome Lucien gradually stopped. Many musicians and nobles were waiting. The first movement was an allegro, pleasant, graceful, and brief, and it captured everyone's attention immediately with a very cheerful sonata allegro form. Julian's smile froze on his face. As a musician, he instantly realized the gap existing between his serenade and Lucien's work. Excellent as his work was, this young alto musician's serenade could be called classical. What Lucien was playing was Amadeus Mozart's Serenade No. 13 for strings in G major. Natasha's purple eyes were lit up by the allegro. After listening to the first 2 bars, she instantly knew that this piece of bagatelle would not let her down. Subconsciously relaxing her hands, all of Felicia's concerns disappeared and her eyes started to shine with excitement. That was the most fabulous serenade she had even heard, even though it was just part of the whole work. Pleasant and cheerful, gentle and elegant. A few guests at the party nodded slightly, following the rhythm while beating time to the music. They wanted to dance. Smiles appeared on their faces. Adet novel benedet. Lucien's long and beautiful hands were moving on the keyboard in a smooth and free manner. His fingers, wrists, arms, and even his body were working cooperatively to present this perfect piece of piano bagatelle. Besides the melody itself, Lucien's manner of playing was also a feast for the guests' eyes. Many young nobles, while enjoying the music, were longing for learning piano and Lucien's new fingerings. Many noble ladies were staring at Lucien in great admiration. What a decent, elegant, and talented gentleman. The girls were wondering about how much a piano playing could show one's artistic elegance. Several minutes later, Lucien pressed down the last key of the piano bagatelle. His right hand was raised in a degage way to show the end of his playing. Then he stood up, bowed to Natasha, then Felicia and the guests present. Lucien's listeners paused a bit, as if they needed some time to recover from the great surprise and excitement. A couple of seconds later, Lucien was surrounded by the thunder of applause from the guests. Beautiful, graceful, and balanced. "I'm proud of you, Lucien," commented Natasha. "Finish the following movements and turn this amazing piece of bagatelle into a serenade masterpiece." Felicia's face flushed with excitement. "Lucien, thank you so much for the gift. I think my coming-of-age ceremony will be recorded in the history of music because of your serenade." Lucien gently hugged Felicia, giving her an encouraging pat on the shoulder. Then he went back and rejoined the musicians. "Lucien, you're indeed a genius. This piano bagatelle is the most beautiful serenade I've ever heard." Christopher smiled, and his eyes were shining with praise. "No one can doubt your talent anymore, Lucien." Sylvia nodded. She was very impressed with the movement of Lucien's fingers, wrists, and arms when he was playing, and with the elegance of this new musical instrument, piano. In her mind, the piano was no inferior to the violin, the queen of all the musical instruments. As Lucien's teacher, Victor was very proud. "I believe that this piece of serenade will become the most popular music work for parties and feasts, even more popular than Symphony of Fate." Then, Victor paused a bit before continuing. "What I appreciate the most is that you employed many challenging playing skills in the bagatelle. After all, beautiful as a serenade is, it cannot be the mainstream of music in alto." Lucien nodded with mixed feelings. He always appreciated all the help that Victor provided him, but he also knew that his future might not have anything to do with music, since the path that he chose was magic. After he got to know where the Continental Congress of Magic was from Rhine, he would leave alto very soon. Lucien did not want to let Victor down. While most of the musicians present were marveling at Lucien's extraordinary talent, Mackenzie looked very resentful. He took a glance at the very disappointed Julian, and then he stepped forward as if something hit him all of a sudden. Mackenzie pointed at Lucien and said in a loud voice in front of the guests, "There's no way that a beginner can compose something like this. You, so despicable. You made a pact with the devil." All of the guests were shocked. They turned around and looked at Mackenzie as if he was insane. It was a very, very serious accusation against Lucien. In other words, Mackenzie wanted Lucien to die. "Mind your words, Mackenzie." Victor looked angry and serious. Talented as Lucien is, he still works very hard. He was the first person speaking out for Lucien, while Lot and Herodotus remained silent. Facing an accusation involving a deal with the devil, even nobles didn't easily dare to defend their classmate. "You're Lucien's teacher. Of course you speak for him." Mackenzie looked around at the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, do you really believe that a pauper who just started to learn music several months ago can achieve such a levels?" The guests started to whisper to each other. Indeed, the fact that, within only a few months' learning of music, a poor, young man was already capable of holding his own concert was definitely very surprising. "You betrayed the God of truth," said Mackenzie in a vicious way. Everyone was looking at Lucien now. When he was about to say something, Natasha said to Mackenzie in a slow but authoritative way, "I know you want to put Lucien on a burning gallows very much, Mackenzie." There was a slight of smile on Natasha's beautiful face. "However, Mackenzie, Lucien's my personal music consultant. You think I'm that stupid to have someone who made a deal with the devil to serve me?" No, I'm not saying that, Your Grace." Mackenzie was flustered by the princess's words. Then what do you mean? Asked Natasha sternly. I mean, it's not normal for, stammered Mackenzie. Natasha cut him off right away. That's why we call him a genius. Lucian received rewards from my family, and that's also why he made such a progress. You have anything to say about that? Mackenzie's face was as red as a tomato. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but finally he released a long sigh like a deflated ball. Of course you're right, Your Grace. I'm overreacting. Then Mackenzie found an excuse and left the party, followed by the frustrated Barrett and Clement, while Julian cheered himself up and said to Christopher sincerely, I'm sorry I was being so arrogant. I want to stay in alto for several years to learn from the great musicians. Alto is the paradise for musicians. Welcome, Julian. Christopher nodded to him. We need fresh blood for our association, and we learn from each other. Julian picked up a glass of wine and turned around to face Lucian. I gotta admit that your serenade is better than mine. I'll learn from you, and one day I'll catch up with you. Then I wish you success. Lucian slightly raised his glass of water. The music for the party started again. Instantly, Lucian was surrounded by a bunch of noble ladies. Mr. Evans, can I have a dance with you? Mr. Evans, you were so charming when you were playing the piano. Can you take a look at my hands to see if I'm suitable for playing piano? The mix of sweet perfumes dizzied Lucian. Luckily, at that moment Felicia came over and saved Lucian by having a minuet with him, after which he went to the patio to stay away from the ladies. The breeze was gentle and cool. Standing on the patio and bathing the bright moonlight, Lucian felt revitalized. However, at that time, Lucian realized that he was being rude since he saw that two beautiful ladies were on the patio as well, snuggling and kissing. The arousing scene of the two beauties showing their love toward each other in the moonlight was like a fabulous painting. Lucian's face twitched a bit and then blushed. When he was about to leave the patio, one of them stopped him and asked, Lucian, what's that look on your face? It was Natasha, with a slight redness on her cheeks. Sylvia was hiding behind Natasha, slightly gasping from the intense kissing. I'm fine. Lucian smiled in an embarrassed way. What's going on in your mind? Natasha slightly lifted her eyebrows and questioned Lucian closely. Well, I'm thinking that what I just saw was not good for my eyes, said Lucian in a playful way. Natasha pointed at herself, and then at Sylvia. Aren't we beautiful? Sure, both of you are real beauties. Having never been with any girl before, Lucian made fun of himself. Let me put it this way. What I just saw hurt my heart. Natasha laughed and stretched herself a bit. I like your personality, Lucian. You're interesting enough to be my friend. Then she said something to Sylvia in a low voice, which made Sylvia giggle. Excuse me, I need to have some water. Sylvia then said to Lucian and left the patio. After Sylvia left, Natasha asked Lucian to follow her back to the party. When they were on the dance floor, Natasha turned around, bowed to Lucian and reached out her right hand. May I have a dance with you? Lucian looked at her hand and paused a bit. Your Grace, I'm afraid that it's not a proper invitation. What? Natasha looked surprised. When she realized what was wrong, she took back her right hand and stood straight, waiting for Lucian's invitation. Sorry, my bad. I forgot you're the gentleman and I'm the lady. I'm used to, you know what I mean? Lucian nodded and smiled. Yes, I know. At it novel been at. Recalling the dancing manner, Lucian reached out his right hand to the princess. Your Grace, may I have the honor to dance with you? Sure, you're my music consultant. Natasha laid her hand on Lucian's palm and followed Lucian to the center of the dance floor. The dance between a decent gentleman and a beautiful young lady should be very pleasant. Unfortunately, their dance wasn't exactly like that. You stepped on my foot, Lucian, said Natasha. I'm sorry, Your Grace, Lucian apologized. But have you figured why? You're dancing in the manner of man. Am I? Your Grace, you just stepped on my foot. Sorry, Lucian. Why don't you dance in the lady's way then? That would solve all the problems, Natasha suggested. I'd rather keep letting you step on me. Lucian shook his head. It took them a while to become cooperative. Natasha asked, Lucian, can I ask you to do me a favor? What is it? Asked Lucian. Well, a rare shy look appeared on Natasha's face. Sylvia likes your serenade a lot, and she wants me to play a piece of love-themed serenade for her birthday before the new year. That's sweet. Lucian did not understand how he would be useful to Natasha yet. But I'm not really a serenade person, said Natasha. I like music which is intense and passionate, not soft and gentle. I just can't do it. So, Your Grace, you want me to compose the serenade for you? Lucian asked. Sort of. Natasha looked a bit embarrassed, but soon made up her mind. Yes, can you do me that favor? Well, I don't think a decent knight like Your Grace would find a ghostwriter for herself. Lucian blinked in a funny way. You're not my ghostwriter. I just don't want to present Sylvia with a piece of mediocre work on her birthday. Natasha was trying to justify it. I'll tell Sylvia that it's your work. Don't worry, Your Grace. Lucian grinned. I was just joking. I would be honored if I could help you solve that problem, Your Grace. Natasha nodded. Awesome. Thank you, Lucian. I'll at least try to work on it as well. And your work will be my second plan. The name of the serenade will be For Sylvia. Then, Lucian paused a few seconds and looked a bit worried. Since I haven't gone through any love experience yet, I may need some extra help. Such as? Natasha leaned forward a bit. I noticed that you have lots of books in your study, Your Grace. Lucian had been coveting the great number of books in Natasha's study for a long time, and he would not let this precious chance slip away. I wonder if I can have the chance to read some of them, say, those love stories books, and some books that introduce histories, cultures, and traditions of other countries, in order to be inspired. The library of the association has only music books. Of course, Natasha smiled. It's not a big deal at all, as many of the old books are actually written in the language used by the ancient Sylvanus magic empire. I can ask the scholars to translate them for you. That would be great. Although Lucian looked pretty calm, his heart was full of excitement. He did not expect that one of his biggest problems could just be solved like that. By copying the many books from the ancient Sylvanus magic empire, Lucian could not only better plan his future trip on the continent, but also learn how to read ancient Sylvanus characters. Although many books of college level were still sealed in Lucian's spirit library, he was already way more knowledgeable than a common sorcerer. Had it not been for the insufficiency of his spiritual power, Lucian should have already become a first-circle sorcerer, which was exactly the opposite situation for the other sorcerer apprentices. Most of them were having a hard time moving forward because they did not have enough knowledge to analyze more complicated spells. Lucian, you stepped on me again, complained Natasha. When the dance ended, Natasha asked Lucian, do you have any other plans recently aside from composing the canon and finishing the bagatelle? I don't want to interrupt your schedule. Not really. Composing serenade can help me relax. Actually, I'm considering composing a piece of sonata to record the perseverance and the great faith that supported me all along when Uncle Joel and his family were held as hostages, answered Lucian. All he wanted to do now was to come up with new music works and hold his own concert. I'm looking forward to that. Natasha looked at him seriously. I know you're good at this theme, and I'll have the scholars translate the books for you starting from tomorrow. After the dance, Lucian was about to get some water when he met Rhine, who was holding a glass of wine in a very elegant way. Good work. Then Rhine whispered to Lucian, I almost forgot to tell you that I already helped you get rid of your basement. No worries anymore. You. Lucian was very surprised. He never expected that Rhine knew this much about him. He was also glad that he did not have to worry about his underground lab anymore, which had been a burden on his heart for a long time since he just could not find a proper chance to destroy it. I know you want to thank me, and you're welcome, Rhine said to Lucian, smiling. I mean no harm toward you. I hope you can trust me. But why? Mr. Rhine? Asked Lucian. After all, the whole thing had nothing to do with Rhine at all. There's no why. Rhine shrugged casually. Maybe I just want to see a great musician making progress without being distracted by something trivial. Then, Rhine raised his glass toward Lucian with a meaningful smile and left. The party tonight was perfect because of Lucian's serenade. Thus, Felicia exempted the debt that Lucian owed her to show her family's appreciation. At a cost of 10 thales, Felicia made a great deal with Lucian. In the following morning, on his way to the Musicians' Association in the administrative district, Lucian was very surprised to find that the bagatelle he played at the party last night was being played everywhere in Alto. Just like Victor said, It was way easier for a piece of serenade to become popular than for a symphony. As soon as Elena saw Lucian coming into the lobby, she waved to him with a big smile on her face. "Morning, Elena," greeted Lucian. "Why are you so happy today?" "I'm happy for you." Covering her mouth, Elena giggled in a low voice. "Before you arrived, a few noble ladies came to the association to look for you. They were hoping that they could become your piano students. Miss Felicia's friend, Yvette, was here as well." Then she handed a pile of letters to Lucian. "These are all feedbacks from musicians who live nearby." Lucian took the letters and was about to walk upstairs, but paused a bit and turned to Elena instead. "Can you tell the ladies that this year I won't accept any students? Apart from being the princess music consultant, I still have to work on producing more music. Mr. Lucian, how come you're always that inspired?" Kathy's eyes were wide open, and she asked with great curiosity, "I heard that, aside from the serenade, you also finished recomposing Mr. Hersey's canon in D." Lucian nodded. "I'm just hoping that I can hold my own concert as soon as possible." "Wow!" exclaimed Elena and Kathy at the same time. Then Elena asked Lucian with expectancy, "I understand that you don't want to have any student right now, but can I ask you some questions related to music once in a while?" "Of course, we can exchange our ideas," said Lucian. The true reason that Lucian refused to have any student was that, as a sorcerer, he might be found out by the church someday, and his students would be in great trouble. After giving Joseph the music sheet of his serenade for registration, from the window Lucian saw that a purple coach was arriving, which was sent by Natasha. In the study of War Gallery, Natasha, wearing a long black dress, was introducing the books to Lucian. Some of them are written in common tongue. "I take it that you want to start to read them as soon as possible." That was Natasha, passionate, decisive, and motivated. As soon as she decided to do something, she wanted to get it done as fast as she could. From her introduction, Lucian had a rough idea about the different book sections in the princess study. At that moment, a middle-aged man came in and bowed to Natasha. "Your Grace." Turning around, Natasha nodded to the man and then said to Lucian, "Mr. Bake from House Hill is a very reputable scholar and linguist. He is your designated consultant and translator for these books." Bake was already bald in his 40s. A thick pair of glasses was sitting on his round face. "Thank you, Mr. Bake," said Lucian. "It's my great pleasure to serve the princess and to be your consultant, Mr. Evans." Bake bowed slightly to Lucian. "You're working on translating the books already, Mr. Bake?" Lucian noticed that there was a thick book under Bake's arm with many small colorful tags among the pages. "Yes, as you may see, Mr. Evans, translating these books takes time, and the princess told me about your hunger for knowledge. I'm hoping that I can cover as many books as possible in this study for you, Mr. Evans," answered Bake slowly. "That's very nice of you, Mr. Bake." Lucian was grateful. "And thank you, Your Grace." Lucian smiled to Natasha. "It's very sweet to see that, young as you are, Mr. Evans, you're this interested in the ancient language and culture of Sylvanas' magic empire. You'll see that their culture was fascinating." Bake walked toward the desk and opened the black book in front of Lucian. "The book that I'm working on right now is Heroes Epic, very beautiful poems." Bake became a bit excited. "What is this book about?" asked Lucian. "Sorry, I'm not really well educated within history." "Oh, that's totally fine." Bake smiled. "The beauty of poem does not require its reader to have much educational background. Instead, it's something you can feel. Get closer and take a look, Mr. Evans." Lucian's long fingers gently ran down the spine of the thick, black book, feeling its antiquity. When Lucian was flipping through the pages, Bake said to him, "The poems in the book were written in memory of those great heroes who followed the lead of the God of Truth and together overthrew the rule of the vicious mages." Fascinating. Lucian quickly went through all the pages, and then in his spirit library, the copy of the book emerged on one of the bookshelves in the ancient literature entry. Then Lucian turned to Natasha. "Have you read these books before, Your Grace? Do you have any book that has already been translated? I've learned Sylvanas in the Noble Abbey before." "I don't need translation," answered Natasha casually. "I'm going to the practicing room now. If I have any question, I'll come back for you." "Enjoy your reading, Lucian." After Natasha left, Lucian directly jumped onto the books and started to read them assiduously. In the following month, Lucian gradually gained a new perspective toward the continent, and even this whole world from the effort he put on reading. In order to gain great power and break the limit of the human body, lots of sorcerers and sorceresses in the past operated countless cruel experiments on human beings by infusing them with the different powers extracted from magic creatures. Most of the subjects died, but the ones who made it gained tremendous power. Surprisingly, yet undoubtedly reasonable. Following the lead of those surviving experiment subjects, people from different parts of the continent who were fed up with being bullied launched uprisings against the empire. At the same time, the Saint Truth, with its many years of secret development, quickly gained its momentum and became the shared belief for those people. That was when the great powers derived from the magic creatures started to be called blessings, and the Saint calendar started to count, followed by the epic war called the War of Dawn, which lasted for over 400 years. Because Lucian was reading the translated versions of the books, all the texts were shedding glory light on the people fighting against the Empire, while depicting the sorcerers and sorceresses as terrifying representatives of the darkness and the devil. At that time, Natasha's family, House Violet, was guarding the remote west territory of Holy Hyle's empire with the great power of the Violet Knights. In the end of the War of Dawn, House Violet provided the church with great help and became the biggest contributor to the success of taking down Alto. The host of House Violet was thus granted the title of the Grand Duke of Alto and became independent from Holy Hyle's empire. In the year 425 of Saint Calendar, the church held one of the most significant synods in history, discussing the topics related to the final stage of the war and the further attack toward the fiend empires across the Dark Mountain Range in the west. However, during that meeting, a great, carefully premeditated divergence over the reading of the doctrine bursted out between some of the Grand Cardinals and the Pope. Since then, the church was divided into two, supported by Chakran Empire and the other duchies. The Grand Cardinals betrayed the Pope and set up a separatist regime in the north. The westward march of the church's army was thus stopped. Lucian realized that the topic of heresy in this world was way more complicated than he thought. Knowing that the Sword Brothers were stationed on the border between the Duchy of Orveret and Chakran Empire, Lucian asked Natasha why the church never started to march westward again. Her answer was very obscure but meaningful. In most believers' eyes, the enemy within concerns us more than external threats. Today, no one except the Pope knows why those cardinals betrayed us. Lucian also read from the books that the front line against the heresy was formed by the north provinces of the Duchy of Orveret, the Kingdom of Syracuse, and Holy Hyle's Empire. Among the total of 60 kingdoms, duchies, empires, and territories on the continent, most of them retained their glory through the years. However, in some, like the Gusta Empire to the far south, the royal family had lost their control over the empire, since the several preeminent noble families in Gusta seized a major part of the political and economical power. Besides, there was a continental sea in the center of the continent, which was called Storm Sea. Natasha's mom was the princess from the kingdom across the Storm Strait, although very little reference could be found about that kingdom. 2 weeks before the new year, sitting in front of the fireplace, Lucian was reading astrology and magic elements. After the great amount of reading, now Lucian could already understand the most commonly used characters in Sylvanas.